My name is Diana. I am 33 years old, and my husband had twins with my own best friend. I quietly signed the divorce papers and gave up everything. When he returned to his parents' house later that day to celebrate, his mother turned pale and asked him if I still had not told him about the truth. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart people who betrayed your trust. The air conditioning in the high-end law office hummed with a quiet and sterile precision. I sat on one side of a massive mahogany conference table. My posture was perfectly straight, and my hands were folded neatly in my lap. Across from me sat Connor. He was 35 years old and wearing a custom-tailored suit that he could not actually afford. He slouched in his leather chair with an arrogant grin plastered across his face. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. Beside him sat Vanessa. She was 33 years old and had been my absolute best friend since our freshman year of college. We had shared dorm rooms and secrets and dreams for the future. She had even been the maid of honor at my wedding to Connor. Now her hands rested protectively over her swollen belly. She was heavily pregnant with twins. Connor was the father. The betrayal should have destroyed me. It should have left me sobbing and screaming and demanding answers. But I felt nothing but a cold and sharp clarity. I watched them sitting there together, projecting a united front of unapologetic smugness. Vanessa adjusted her maternity dress and gave me a look of deep pity that was entirely manufactured. "You really should not look so surprised, Diana," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You were always married to your spreadsheets. You spent all your time buried in your boring financial consulting job. You never made time for him." Connor needed a warm and real woman to build a family with. Someone who actually knows how to nurture a home instead of just crunching numbers all day. I did not blink. I simply looked at her and let her words hang in the empty space of the room. My attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat next to me. He cleared his throat and tried to redirect the conversation back to the legal documents spread out before us. But Connor was not ready to move on. He leaned forward and placed his elbows on the table to make sure he had my full attention. "Vanessa is right, Diana," Connor said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "You have always been too rigid, too obsessed with playing it safe. Look at me. I took risks. I built Apex Innovations from the ground up. I am an innovator and a visionary. You just organize other people's money for a living. I need a partner who understands the kind of high-stakes world I operate in." He puffed out his chest with unearned pride. Apex Innovations was his tech startup. He had spent the last 3 years talking about it incessantly. He called himself a disruptor. He hosted lavish networking parties and rented an expensive office space downtown just to impress potential investors. Now he was staring at me with pure condescension. "We are on the verge of a massive Series B funding round," Connor bragged loudly. "My anonymous angel investor has been backing me for years, and they are about to bring in the big money. My company is going to have a multi-million-dollar valuation by the end of the quarter. I am about to be incredibly wealthy, Diana. And you are going to be sitting in a gray cubicle balancing budgets for middle management. I needed to cut the dead weight before my company goes public." My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered that we did not have to tolerate this kind of verbal abuse. He suggested we take a recess or demand a larger share of the marital assets. He knew the law. He knew that because the company was founded during our marriage, I was legally entitled to half of his equity. He knew I could demand alimony. He knew I could make this divorce a long and agonizing process for Connor and Vanessa. But I just raised my hand slightly to silence my attorney. I looked directly into Connor's eyes. His arrogance was blinding him to reality. He truly believed he had outsmarted me. He believed his success was entirely his own doing. He believed Vanessa was his ultimate prize. "Where do I sign?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and even. My lawyer looked at me in complete shock. "Diana, you cannot be serious," he whispered urgently. "You are entitled to half of Apex Innovations. You are entitled to spousal support. We have not even begun to negotiate the division of assets. You cannot just give him everything. I am completely serious, I replied without breaking eye contact with my soon-to-be ex-husband. I want a clean break. I want zero alimony. I surrender all claims to Apex Innovations and any future profits it might generate. I want my name completely removed from his business and his personal life, effective immediately. Give me the pen. Vanessa let out a short and victorious laugh. She squeezed Connor's arm and beamed with delight. See, baby, I told you she would not fight. She is too passive. She does not have the stomach for a real battle. Connor chuckled and shook his head in disbelief. He looked at me like I was the most pathetic creature he had ever encountered. You are just going to roll over. He mocked, laughing openly now. I always knew you had no spine, Diana. You are just going to walk away and let me keep 100% of a multi-million-dollar company. You really are as boring and weak as I told Vanessa you were. This is almost too easy. I took the heavy silver pen from my lawyer. The metal felt cool and solid in my grip. I pulled the thick stack of divorce papers toward me. I read through the stipulations. It explicitly stated that I relinquished all marital claims to his startup. It stated that we would walk away with only our separate personal bank accounts. It was a complete and total surrender on paper. I signed my name on the first page, then the second, then the third. My signature was elegant and precise. There was no hesitation in my movements. Every stroke of the pen severed another tie to the man who had lied to me and the woman who had betrayed our friendship. My lawyer watched me in stunned silence. He had spent weeks preparing for a brutal litigation. He had gathered financial records and drafted aggressive settlement demands. He could not understand why a sharp and successful woman like me would simply surrender to a cheating husband and his pregnant mistress. But he did not know the whole story. He did not know what I knew. I finished signing the final page and pushed the documents across the mahogany table toward Connor. Your turn, I said simply. Connor grabbed the pen eagerly. He did not even bother to read the fine print. He was too blinded by his own greed and his perceived victory. He scrawled his signature across the documents with sloppy and rushed strokes. He was practically vibrating with excitement. He had kept his company. He had kept his money. He was free to marry his pregnant mistress without losing a single dime. There, Connor said, tossing the pen back onto the table. It is done. You are officially out of my life, Diana. You can go back to your spreadsheets and your lonely apartment. Vanessa and I have a family to raise and an empire to build. Vanessa stood up carefully, supporting her heavy belly. She looked down at me with a triumphant smile. Goodbye, Diana. Try not to be too bitter. Maybe you will find a nice accountant to settle down with someday. I remained seated as they gathered their things. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of emotion. I just watched them walk toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. They were laughing together, already planning how they would spend his future wealth. They were completely unaware of the reality of their situation. I waited until the door clicked shut behind them. The room fell silent again. My lawyer sighed heavily and rubbed his temples. Diana, I have to go on the record and say this was a terrible mistake. He said, his voice full of professional concern. You just handed him a golden ticket. He is going to make millions and you walked away with nothing. You let them walk all over you. I finally allowed a small and cold smile to touch my lips. I reached down to the floor beside my chair and picked up my leather briefcase. I snapped the brass locks open and reached inside. I pulled out a thick and sealed manila folder. It was heavy with legal documents and financial audits. I handed the folder across the table to my lawyer. No, I did not, I said, my voice dropping to a low and steady tone. I let him think he won. I let him keep his company because his company is completely worthless. I need you to file these foreclosure notices immediately. My lawyer looked confused as he took the folder from my hands. Foreclosure notices, he asked. For what? For everything, I replied calmly. It is time to collect. My attorney Arthur opened the manila folder with hesitant fingers. He had spent the last 2 months reviewing our joint tax returns and joint bank accounts. He thought he knew exactly what my financial situation looked like. He thought I was a mid-level financial consultant, making a respectable but modest salary. That was the story I had sold to Connor for our entire marriage, and it was the story my lawyer had believed up until this exact second. Arthur slid the first document out of the folder. It was a thick commercial loan agreement bound by heavy blue legal tape. I watched his eyes scan the top of the page. He frowned and adjusted his glasses, pushing them higher up on the bridge of his nose. He looked at the borrower name, which was Apex Innovations. Then he looked at the lender name, which was a corporate entity called Vanguard Capital Partners. Diana, he started, his voice thick with confusion. This is a multi-million-dollar commercial loan. Connor owes this money to a private equity firm. I do not understand what this has to do with your divorce settlement. You just signed away your rights to his company. If his startup is drowning in debt, you are extremely lucky you walked away clean today. But why do you have the original lender documents in your personal briefcase? I leaned back in my leather chair and crossed my legs. I did not walk away clean, Arthur. I walked away as the sole creditor of his entire miserable existence. Arthur flipped to the second page, then he frantically flipped to the third. His breathing hitched audibly in the quiet room. He looked at the signature line on the loan agreement. Connor had signed it as the primary borrower. But right below his signature were two other names acting as guarantors, Linda and William. Connor had used his parents' sprawling suburban estate as collateral to secure the initial funding for his tech startup. Arthur looked up at me. His face was entirely pale and a bead of sweat formed on his forehead. Diana, this loan is for an astronomical amount of money. If Connor defaults on this, his parents lose their home. They lose everything they have worked for their entire lives. And Vanguard Capital Partners holds the ultimate lien on the property. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression completely neutral. That is correct. But how did you get this folder? Arthur asked. He was flipping through the pages faster now, looking for a catch or a loophole. Did you steal these from his home office? If you did this, evidence is completely inadmissible in a court of law. We cannot use stolen financial documents to leverage a better divorce settlement. It is career suicide for both of us. I let out a soft and genuine laugh. I did not steal them, Arthur. I own them. He froze. The heavy paper crumpled slightly in his rigid grip. What do you mean you own them? I mean, Vanguard Capital Partners is a shell corporation, I said, my voice dropping to a perfectly calm and authoritative register. It is a subsidiary of a much larger boutique venture capital firm that I founded 7 years ago. The firm operates out of the penthouse suite in the financial district. I am the founder and the chief executive officer. Connor thinks I sit in a gray cubicle balancing budgets for middle management because he is a narcissist who never bothered to ask what I actually do for a living. He heard the words financial consulting on our first date and immediately tuned out. He spent our entire marriage treating me like an accessory, a boring and practical wife who managed his laundry and paid the utility bills while he played the role of a brilliant tech visionary. Arthur was staring at me like I was a ghost. You are the lender, he whispered in absolute disbelief. You funded his company. Yes, I said simply. 3 years ago, Connor came to me complaining that traditional banks would not approve his commercial business loan. His business model was a complete joke. His revenue projections were entirely fabricated to look good on paper. No legitimate bank was going to touch Apex Innovations with a 10-foot pole. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. He went to a private equity firm seeking a high-risk venture loan. What he did not know was that the firm was secretly owned by my parent company. He submitted the application and used his parents' estate as collateral to guarantee the funds. I paused and let the weight of my next words settle into the quiet room. But he did not ask his parents for permission, Arthur. He forged their signatures on the collateral agreement. Arthur dropped the folder onto the mahogany table. The loud smack echoed against the wood paneling of the room. He committed felony forgery. Arthur stated, his voice trembling with the legal implications. He committed wire fraud and bank fraud. He forged his own parents' signatures to secure millions of dollars. And you knew about it this whole time. I discovered the forgery during my firm's underwriting process. I explained calmly. I could have sent him to federal prison right then and there, but I loved him. I actually loved him, and I believed in our marriage. So I made a terrible mistake. I decided to protect him from his own reckless ambition. I quietly authorized the loan through my subsidiary. I became his anonymous angel investor. I structured the loan so that his parents would never find out what he did, as long as he kept making the minimum monthly payments. Every time his company nearly went bankrupt over the past 3 years, I quietly injected more capital through Vanguard. I propped him up. I made him look like a massive success to the outside world. I saved his parents from absolute financial ruin, and I never asked for a single word of thanks. I stood up from my chair and walked over to the large floor-to-ceiling window. The city traffic moved silently on the streets far below, looking like tiny toys. And how did he repay my loyalty? I asked the glass window. He slept with my best friend. He got her pregnant with twins. He brought her into this very office and mocked me to my face. He called me weak. He called me boring. He said he was cutting the dead weight so he could build an empire with a real woman. I turned back to face my lawyer. Arthur was looking at the documents with a completely new understanding. The professional pity he had felt for me 10 minutes ago had entirely vanished. It was replaced by a profound and terrified respect. Look at page 14 of the loan agreement. I instructed him, pointing at the folder. Read section 4, paragraph B. Arthur quickly flipped through the thick stack of papers. He found the section and began to read aloud, his voice echoing slightly. In the event of a significant moral failing, including but not limited to criminal conviction, public scandal, or the dissolution of the primary borrower's marriage, the lender reserves the right to trigger an immediate morality clause. Arthur stopped reading. He looked up at me. His mouth was slightly open. Keep reading, I commanded gently. Arthur swallowed hard and looked back down at the page. Upon the triggering of said morality clause, the entire principal balance of the loan, plus all accrued interest, shall become immediately due and payable in full. Failure to remit payment within 48 hours will result in the immediate freezing of all business assets and the execution of all collateral liens. He set the paper down carefully as if it might burn his fingers. His hands were shaking slightly. You embedded a poison pill in his own funding, Arthur said, marveling at the legal trap. You tied his company's survival directly to the fidelity of your marriage. I am a venture capitalist, Arthur, I replied, picking up my leather gloves from the table. I manage risk for a living. Connor was a massive risk. I needed an absolute guarantee that if he ever betrayed me, I could pull the plug on the entire operation. He signed the contract without reading it, just like he signed those divorce papers today without reading the fine print. He was too busy gloating about his fake success to realize he was signing his own financial execution order. So what happens now? Arthur asked. His professional demeanor was struggling to keep up with the sheer magnitude of the trap I had set. Now you do your job, I said, sliding my hands into my leather gloves. You are going to draft the default notice. You are going to cite the divorce decree that he just gleefully signed as the triggering event for the morality clause. You are going to notify his banks that Apex Innovations is officially in default of a multi-million-dollar commercial loan. And the collateral? Arthur asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The parents' house in the suburbs. File the foreclosure notice, I said without a single ounce of hesitation. File it all. But Diana, Arthur started trying to play the voice of reason. If you execute the lien on the house, his parents will be evicted. They will lose everything they have worked for. They might not even know what he did. They raised a monster, I replied coldly. They raised an arrogant man who thinks he can forge their names, cheat on his loyal wife, and walk away laughing with his pregnant mistress. Actions have severe consequences. Connor is about to learn that lesson the hard way, and unfortunately, his parents are going to be collateral damage. I protected them for 3 years. My charity ends today. I picked up my coat and draped it over my arm. The sterile air conditioning in the office suddenly felt incredibly refreshing. The heavy weight that had been sitting on my chest for the past 6 months was finally gone. I felt lighter and more powerful than I had in years. When do you want me to serve him? Arthur asked, standing up from the table. He was gathering the documents and placing them securely back into the manila folder. Should I send the courier this afternoon to his office? I looked at the sleek silver clock on the wall. It was Friday afternoon. Connor and Vanessa were probably already on their way to some expensive restaurant to celebrate their victory. They were probably toasting to their brilliant future. They were dreaming about the millions of dollars they thought they were going to receive from the anonymous angel investor. I thought about the smug look on Vanessa's face. I thought about the way she had patted her pregnant belly and told me to find a nice accountant to settle down with. I thought about Connor laughing at me and calling me a weak woman who did not have the stomach for a real battle. No, I said, adjusting the collar of my coat. Do not serve him today. Let them go to their fancy dinner. Let them celebrate their big win. Let them spend the entire weekend dreaming about their beautiful and wealthy future together. Let them enjoy the grand illusion for just a little bit longer. I walked toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. I paused with my hand on the metal handle and looked back at my lawyer. His eyes were wide with shock and absolute realization. He finally understood exactly who I was and exactly what I was capable of doing. Let him celebrate the weekend. I said, my voice echoing softly in the quiet room. We dropped the guillotine on Monday. The weekend arrived with a crisp and clear evening sky over the affluent suburbs. 30 miles away from the towering skyscrapers of the financial district stood a sprawling and perfectly manicured estate. The house belonged to William and Linda. It was a massive stone structure surrounded by ancient oak trees and a pristine green lawn that required a dedicated landscaping team to maintain. A long, sweeping driveway led up to the grand entrance where luxury cars rested under the glow of warm security lights. Inside the house, the atmosphere was festive and electric. The massive dining room table was set with fine crystal glasses, polished silver, and expensive porcelain plates. A lavish catered dinner was being prepared in the background, filling the air with the rich scent of roasted meats and expensive herbs. Linda was 60 years old and completely devoted to her son. She floated through the dining room, adjusting a floral centerpiece with a bright smile on her face. William was 62 years old and stood by the built-in bar pouring drinks with an air of absolute satisfaction. They were celebrating. Tonight was a monumental occasion for their family. Their golden child had finally shed his dead weight. They had never liked my dedication to my career. They had always viewed my quiet ambition as a direct insult to their traditional values. They wanted a daughter-in-law who would host garden parties and bake cookies and hang on their son's every word. They did not want a woman who worked late and refused to play the role of a subservient trophy. The heavy oak front door swung open, and Connor walked in with his arm wrapped tightly around Vanessa. They looked like they had just conquered the world. Vanessa was wearing a designer maternity dress that hugged her pregnant belly tightly, showing off the twins she was carrying. She walked into the grand foyer with the confidence of a queen stepping into her newly acquired palace. Connor announced their arrival with a loud and booming laugh. He dropped his keys onto the marble entryway table and immediately walked over to the bar to greet his father. William clapped him on the shoulder and pulled him into a tight embrace. Linda rushed out of the dining room and threw her arms around Vanessa, cooing over the pregnancy and telling her how absolutely glowing she looked. It is officially done, Connor declared, his voice echoing through the large and opulent room. I am a free man. The papers are signed and filed. We do not have to worry about her ever again. Linda clapped her hands together in pure delight. She instructed everyone to move into the formal dining room. The table was vast and intimidating, but tonight it felt like a gathering of victorious conquerors. William brought over a bottle of extremely rare vintage champagne that he had been saving for a special occasion. He popped the cork with a loud cheer and poured the bubbling liquid into 4 tall crystal flutes. He even poured a tiny symbolic splash for Vanessa so she could join the toast. To my brilliant son, William said, raising his glass high into the air. You finally dropped that cold and workaholic wife of yours. We always knew she was holding you back, Connor. She never understood your vision. She never appreciated your genius. Now you have a real woman by your side and a beautiful family on the way. to Apex Innovations and the incredible future ahead. They all clinked their glasses together. The sharp sound of crystal ringing out in the dining room was a symphony of arrogance. Vanessa took a tiny sip of her drink and smiled radiantly at Linda. "Thank you so much, Linda," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with artificial humility. "You have raised such an incredible man. I always told Connor that he needed someone who actually cared about his dreams. Diana was just so rigid. She was always obsessed with her boring financial job. She would come home from crunching numbers all day and just complain about budgets. Connor needed a warm and nurturing environment to foster his creativity. He needed someone who believes in his potential." Linda reached across the table and squeezed Vanessa's hand affectionately. "You are exactly what this family needed, Vanessa. You are going to be a wonderful mother to my grandchildren. We are just so relieved that Connor got out of that miserable marriage before his company completely takes off. It would have been a tragedy if she had tried to drag him down during his biggest moment of triumph." The catered dinner was served in multiple courses. There were plates of seared scallops and filet mignon and rich truffle potatoes. They ate like royalty while discussing the destruction of my life. Connor dominated the conversation completely. He chewed his steak and waved his fork around to emphasize his points. He was completely intoxicated by his own perceived brilliance. "You would not believe how easy it was today," Connor boasted, leaning back in his heavy wooden dining chair. She just sat there like a statue. She did not shed a single tear. She did not put up a fight. She just signed the papers and handed over everything. "I kept 100% of my equity in Apex Innovations. She did not even ask for alimony. She just rolled over and let me walk away with the entire kingdom." William laughed and shook his head, cutting another piece of meat. "That is because she lacks ambition, Connor. She always lacked the killer instinct required to survive in the real business world. She probably looked at the valuation of your startup and got intimidated. She knows she does not belong in the high-stakes technology sector." "Exactly," Connor agreed, taking a large gulp of his vintage champagne. "She does not understand the mechanics of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. She works with basic corporate spreadsheets. She has no idea what is coming for Apex Innovations. She has no idea what she just walked away from." Vanessa smiled and rested a hand on her pregnant belly. She looked around the lavish dining room, clearly imagining herself redecorating the entire estate one day. "Tell them about the funding, baby. Tell them what the investors said yesterday." Vanessa urged him, playing the perfect supportive partner. Connor puffed out his chest and set his glass down on the table. The corners of his mouth turned up into a massive grin. He looked at his parents with a look of absolute triumph. They were perfectly happy and perfectly oblivious as the weekend began. They did not know what was coming on Monday. The laughter in the dining room was loud and boisterous. Connor was wiping a tear of amusement from his eye. Vanessa was giggling while holding her pregnant stomach. William was reaching for the bottle of vintage champagne to pour another round. But Linda was completely still. The bright and maternal smile had entirely vanished from her face. She was staring at her son with a look of pure and unadulterated terror. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin an ashen gray. Her fingers went limp. The expensive crystal champagne flute slipped from her grasp and hit the hardwood floor. The sharp sound of shattering glass cut through the celebration like a gunshot. Shards of crystal and expensive champagne exploded across the polished wood. Everyone froze. William stopped pouring the wine. Connor lowered his hand. Vanessa let out a small gasp of surprise. They all turned to look at Linda, who was gripping the edge of the heavy oak dining table so hard her knuckles were white. Her chest was heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. "Mom, what is wrong?" Connor asked, his confident smirk faltering slightly. "Did you cut yourself on the glass?" Linda did not look at the shattered crystal. She kept her terrified gaze locked squarely on her son. Her voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke, but in the dead silence of the room it sounded like a scream. "Connor," Linda said, her voice trembling violently. "She still has not told you about that." Connor frowned and shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Told me about what? What are you talking about?" William set the champagne bottle down heavily. "Linda, you are shaking. What is going on?" Linda ignored her husband. She closed her eyes for a brief second as if bracing herself for a physical blow. When she opened them again, they were filled with tears of absolute dread. 3 years ago, Connor, she said, her voice gaining a desperate volume. 3 years ago when you started Apex Innovations, when the banks turned you down because your business plan was too risky. You told your father and me that you found a private equity firm willing to back you. I did find one. Connor argued, his tone defensive now. Vanguard Capital Partners. I literally just told you about them. They are the ones preparing the Series B funding. They did not just magically approve your loan, Connor. Linda cried out, her voice breaking. They required collateral. A massive amount of collateral to secure the millions of dollars they were giving you. And you did not have any assets of your own. Connor swallowed hard. A visible bead of sweat formed at his temple. He glanced nervously at Vanessa, who was watching the exchange with growing confusion. Mom, this is not the time to discuss corporate underwriting. No, we are going to discuss it right now, Linda demanded, slamming her hand down on the tablecloth. Because you used this house, Connor. You used our estate. You took the deed to the home your father and me worked our entire lives to pay for, and you pledged it to a private equity firm as collateral for a high-risk venture loan. William stood up so fast his chair scraped violently against the floor. What are you saying, Linda? I never signed any collateral agreement. I never authorized anyone to put a lien on this house. I know you did not, William. Linda sobbed, turning to look at her husband with an expression of profound shame. Because he forged our signatures. Our own son forged our names on federal financial documents to get his hands on that money. He committed felony fraud. The silence that followed was suffocating. William stared at Connor with a look of absolute betrayal. Vanessa shifted away from Connor slightly, her hands moving protectively over her stomach. Connor opened his mouth to deny it, but no words came out. His arrogant facade was cracking, fracturing under the weight of his own criminal actions. How do you know this? William demanded, his voice dangerously low. If he forged our names 3 years ago, how did you find out? Because Diana caught him. Linda wept, burying her face in her hands. Diana discovered the forgery during a routine review of his home office files. She found the copies of the forged deed transfers. She brought them to me while Connor was out of town on a business trip. She showed me exactly what he had done. She told me he was facing decades in federal prison for wire fraud and bank fraud. Connor gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles were white. He was breathing heavily, his mind racing to find a way out of the corner he was backed into. She lied to you, he stammered. Diana is a liar. She was just trying to cause trouble between us. She brought me the original documents, Connor. Linda shouted, dropping her hands from her face. I saw my own forged signature. I saw your father's forged signature. I knew exactly what you did. I begged her not to go to the police. I got down on my knees in my own kitchen, and I begged your wife to spare you from prison. I begged her to spare your father and me from losing our home to the bank. William looked sick. He placed a hand on his chest as if he was having trouble breathing. What did she do, Linda? What did Diana do? She saved us, Linda whispered, her tears falling freely onto her expensive silk blouse. Diana told me she loved Connor and she wanted to protect our family. She told me she had the capital to make the problem go away quietly. She used a shell corporation to buy out the entire debt from the original lender. She took over the loan completely so that the police would never get involved and the bank would never seize our property. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes wide with a sudden and terrifying realization. Wait, Vanessa said, her voice shaking. Are you saying Diana paid off the loan? Linda looked at Vanessa with a mixture of pity and terror. I am saying Diana is the loan, Vanessa. Diana is Vanguard Capital Partners. She is the anonymous angel investor Connor has been bragging about all night. She owns the debt. She owns the lien on this house. She controls every single penny that goes into Apex Innovations. Connor leaped out of his chair. The heavy wooden piece of furniture crashed backward onto the floor. That is impossible, he roared, his face turning a dark shade of red. Vanguard is a massive equity firm. Diana is just a mid-level consultant. She does not have the kind of capital required to fund a tech startup. You never asked her what she actually does, Connor, Linda sobbed. You never cared. She is the founder and chief executive officer of the parent company that owns Vanguard. She is one of the most powerful venture capitalists in the city. She has been personally funding your entire company for 3 years just to keep you out of federal prison. The air was sucked entirely out of the dining room. Connor stood frozen in place. The vintage champagne he had been drinking suddenly threatened to come back up. The massive Series B funding round he had been expecting next week was not real. The wealthy anonymous investor he thought he had charmed was actually the woman he had just gleefully divorced and humiliated in a law office a few hours ago. He had spent the entire afternoon mocking the very person who held his life, his freedom, and his parents' home in the palm of her hand. Vanessa let out a small, terrified whimper. She looked at Connor, her eyes darting frantically around the room. "You told me you were wealthy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You told me you owned the company. You told me she was nobody. She is nobody." Connor shouted frantically, trying to maintain control of the rapidly disintegrating illusion. "She is bluffing. Even if she owns the debt, she cannot just take everything. There are laws. There are commercial protections. I signed the divorce papers. We are legally separated. She has no claim to my assets anymore." A sharp and authoritative knock at the heavy oak front door echoed through the silent house. It was a loud, rhythmic pounding that sounded incredibly out of place in the quiet suburban neighborhood. Nobody moved. The four of them stood in the dining room, paralyzed by the sudden noise. The knock came again, louder and more insistent this time. William was the first to break the trance. He slowly walked out of the dining room and moved toward the grand foyer. His footsteps were heavy and dragging. Connor followed closely behind him, his heart pounding aggressively against his ribs. Vanessa and Linda stayed in the dining room, clutching each other in pure fear. William reached the front door and pulled it open. Standing on the front porch, under the glow of the security lights, was a man in a plain, dark suit. He was holding a thick stack of legal documents bound by heavy blue tape. The man did not smile. He looked directly past William and locked eyes with Connor. "Connor," the man asked, his voice highly professional and completely detached. "Yes," Connor replied, his voice trembling slightly. The man stepped forward and thrust the thick stack of documents directly into Connor's chest, forcing him to take them. "You have been served," the man said simply. He turned around, walked down the sweeping driveway, and climbed into an unmarked sedan. He drove away into the crisp evening, leaving Connor standing in the doorway with his hands full of paperwork. Connor looked down at the documents. The top page featured the bold letterhead of Vanguard Capital Partners. His hands shook violently as he flipped past the cover sheet. William leaned over his son's shoulder, his face pale as he read the bold legal print. It was a formal notice of immediate default. Connor scanned the text, his eyes darting back and forth across the page. His breath came in short and panicked gasps. He found the specific clause highlighted in bright yellow ink. It cited Section 4, Paragraph B of his original commercial loan agreement. The morality clause. The document clearly stated that the legal dissolution of the primary borrower's marriage constituted a significant moral failing under the terms of the contract. By eagerly signing the divorce papers that afternoon, Connor had unknowingly triggered the exact mechanism required to destroy his own life. The text below the highlighted section was cold and unforgiving. It demanded the immediate repayment of the entire principal balance plus 3 years of accrued interest. It stated that failure to remit the full payment within 48 hours would result in the immediate freezing of all business assets associated with Apex Innovations. Furthermore, it confirmed that the lender would execute the collateral lien on the suburban estate, resulting in immediate foreclosure proceedings. Connor dropped the papers onto the marble entryway table. The documents scattered across the polished surface, laying out his absolute ruin for everyone to see. He backed away from the table, his hands gripping his hair in a gesture of pure desperation. "She did it," Connor whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at his father, his eyes wide with a terror he had never experienced before. "The divorce was the trigger. She let me sign the papers so she could default the loan. She is taking the company. She is taking the house." She is taking everything. William stared at the scattered papers, his own financial ruin staring right back at him. He turned to look at his golden boy, the son he had praised and enabled for 35 years. For the first time in his life, William had absolutely no idea how to fix his son's mistakes. The grand celebration was completely over. The vintage champagne was pooling on the dining room floor, mixing with the shattered crystal. The elaborate dinner was turning cold on the fine porcelain plates. The facade of wealth and success had been entirely dismantled in a matter of minutes. Diana had not just walked away from the marriage, she had strategically and flawlessly set the entire kingdom on fire. Connor snatched the thick stack of legal documents off the polished marble table and hurled them across the grand foyer. The papers scattered like dead leaves, hitting the base of the sweeping staircase. His face was a rigid mask of pure and aggressive denial. He paced back and forth across the entryway, running his hands through his hair. His chest heaved as he let out a loud and forced laugh that echoed harshly against the high ceilings. "It is a bluff," Connor shouted, his voice cracking slightly with manic energy. "It is a completely pathetic and desperate bluff. Diana does not have the capital to hold a loan of this magnitude. She is trying to scare us because she realizes she made a massive mistake signing those divorce papers today. She wants me to panic and offer her a settlement. She wants me to beg." William stood frozen by the open front door, staring at his son in utter disbelief. He looked down at the scattered papers, which clearly bore the official seals of the county clerk and Vanguard Capital Partners. William was a man who understood the ruthless nature of corporate law. He knew a legitimate legal filing when he saw one. He knew this was not a scare tactic. Linda and Vanessa emerged from the dining room, drawn by the sound of Connor shouting. Vanessa clutched her pregnant stomach, her eyes wide with mounting terror. She looked at the documents covering the floor and then at Connor. Her entire future was suddenly resting on the precipice of absolute destruction. "Connor, what is happening?" Vanessa asked, her voice trembling. "Is she really taking the company? Is she taking the money?" Connor immediately rushed over to Vanessa and grabbed her by the shoulders. He forced his facial features into a mask of complete confidence, playing the role of the fearless tech visionary. He needed her to believe the illusion was still intact. He needed to believe it himself. "Nobody is taking anything, Vanessa," Connor insisted, his tone dripping with arrogant certainty. "Diana is a mid-level consultant. She balances spreadsheets for middle management. She does not have the personal wealth or the corporate infrastructure to back a multi-million-dollar venture capital firm. She probably hired a cheap lawyer to draft these fake notices just to ruin our celebration. I am going to call my legal team on Monday morning and we are going to crush her. We are going to sue her for harassment and extortion. We are going to take everything she actually owns." He pulled Vanessa into a tight embrace, stroking her hair and whispering empty promises about their wealthy future. He told her about the luxury baby moon they were going to take. He reminded her of the massive Series B funding round that was supposedly hitting their bank accounts next week. He painted a picture of absolute financial invincibility. But over Vanessa's shoulder, Connor locked eyes with his father. William was not buying the performance. William saw the raw and unfiltered panic hiding behind his son's arrogant bravado. William knew that the golden boy had finally flown too close to the sun. The rest of the weekend was an agonizing exercise in psychological torture. Connor refused to let anyone discuss the default notice. He forced Vanessa to continue shopping for expensive nursery furniture online. He drank heavily, pouring glass after glass of expensive scotch to quiet the screaming voice of doubt in his own head. He paced the floors of his luxury apartment at night, staring at his phone and waiting for Monday morning to arrive. He was absolutely convinced that he could fix this with a few angry phone calls. He believed his charisma and his status as a tech founder would magically override the legal reality of his situation. Monday morning finally broke over the city. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the financial district. Connor did not even bother to go into the Apex Innovations office. He sat at his glass dining table wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants. He opened his laptop and lined up his cell phone, a notepad, and his corporate banking tokens. He was ready to clear up this ridiculous administrative error. He confidently dialed the premium dedicated support line for his primary corporate bank. He entered his platinum account number and his secure PIN. He fully expected to hear the usual sycophantic greeting from his assigned wealth manager. Instead, the automated system transferred him directly to a generic customer service queue. Connor tapped his fingers impatiently against the glass table. After 5 agonizing minutes of hold music, a representative finally answered. Her voice was flat and entirely devoid of the respect Connor felt he deserved. "I need to speak with my dedicated account manager immediately," Connor demanded, using his most authoritative executive voice. "There is a hold on my corporate checking account and I need it lifted right now. I have payroll clearing tomorrow and I cannot have any administrative delays." "I apologize, sir," the representative stated coldly. "Your dedicated wealth management services have been suspended. I am looking at your corporate profile now. All associated business accounts under Apex Innovations have been frozen by our legal compliance department." "Frozen?" Connor shouted, standing up from the table. "What do you mean frozen?" "You cannot freeze my operational capital. I am the chief executive officer. I demand that you release those funds this instant." "I cannot do that, sir," the representative replied, reading from a standardized legal script. "We received a verified notice of default and an execution of lien from Vanguard Capital Partners at 8 o'clock this morning. Pursuant to federal commercial banking regulations, all liquid assets held under your corporate entity are completely locked pending the resolution of debt collection proceedings. You will not be able to process any withdrawals, transfers, or payments." Connor felt the blood rush to his ears. The room started to spin. "Listen to me," he pleaded, his arrogance instantly vaporizing into sheer desperation. "That default notice is fraudulent. The creditor is my ex-wife. She is running a scam. You have to let me access my operational funds. If you believe the lien is fraudulent, you will need to take that up with the appropriate judicial authorities." The representative responded, her tone completely unsympathetic. "However, until a judge orders otherwise, your accounts remain frozen. Is there anything else I can assist you with today, sir?" Connor slammed his hand down on the end call button. His chest tightened painfully. He immediately dialed his secondary corporate bank where he kept his reserve capital. The exact same thing happened. He dialed the credit card company that managed his corporate platinum cards. The automated system informed him that his entire credit line had been revoked due to a critical change in his creditworthiness. He was completely locked out. He could not access a single penny. He could not pay his employees. He could not pay his rent. He could not even buy a cup of coffee using his business funds. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. Diana had not been bluffing. She had executed a flawless and synchronized financial strike. She had severed his access to the global banking system before he even woke up. He was a highly arrogant tech founder with a massive multi-million-dollar valuation on paper, but in reality, he possessed absolutely zero liquid assets or capital. He was functionally bankrupt. His cell phone buzzed violently against the glass table. He jumped in his chair, startled by the sudden noise. He looked at the caller identification. It was his chief financial officer. Connor swiped the screen to answer, bringing the phone to his ear with a trembling hand. "Tell me you have a solution," Connor gasped, skipping any formal greetings. "Tell me you have a backdoor way to access the reserve accounts. The banks are acting insane right now. They are actually honoring Diana's fake default notices. We need to secure payroll before the staff finds out what is going on." There was a long and heavy silence on the other end of the line. When his chief financial officer finally spoke, his voice was trembling with absolute panic. "Connor, it is not just the banks." His chief financial officer stammered, his breath coming in shallow and panicked bursts. "The banks freezing our assets is the least of our problems right now." "What are you talking about?" Connor demanded, his voice cracking. "What could possibly be worse than losing our entire operational cash flow?" "The vendors, Connor," his chief financial officer cried out, sounding like a man standing on the deck of a sinking ship. "Our key technology vendors, our server hosts, our cloud infrastructure providers, they are all abandoning ship." Connor gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Why would they abandon us? We have active service level agreements. They cannot just cut us off without warning. They did not do it without warning. His chief financial officer replied, desperation bleeding into every single syllable. Vanguard Capital Partners did not just serve the default notice to the banks. They legally served our vendors with official notices of our impending corporate insolvency. They legally informed our entire supply chain that Apex Innovations is in default of a multi-million-dollar loan and that all of our assets are marked for immediate liquidation. Connor felt his knees buckle. He sank slowly back into his dining chair. The breath was completely knocked out of his lungs. They are demanding immediate cash payment for all outstanding invoices by noon today. His chief financial officer continued, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. If we do not wire them the money, they are shutting down our servers. They are wiping our cloud infrastructure. They are going to pull the plug on our entire operational network in 3 hours. Connor stared blankly at the wall of his luxury apartment. The walls were rapidly closing in. The empire he had built on a foundation of lies and forged signatures was collapsing around him with terrifying speed. He had spent his entire marriage underestimating the quiet and brilliant woman he had betrayed. He thought he had cut the dead weight to secure his glorious future. He never realized that the dead weight was the only thing keeping him from plummeting straight into the absolute and completely unforgiving abyss. He was entirely trapped. While Connor sat in his apartment watching his fraudulent empire burn to the ground, Vanessa was living in a completely different reality. She had absolutely no idea that the foundation of her new wealthy lifestyle had just been pulverized into dust. She spent her Monday morning indulging in a prenatal massage and having her hair professionally blown out at a luxury salon downtown. She felt like an absolute queen. She was carrying the heirs to a massive tech fortune, and she was determined to make sure everyone in her high society circle knew it. She ordered a private black car service and directed the driver to take her to the most exclusive shopping district in the entire city. Her destination was a high-end baby boutique famous for importing custom nursery furniture directly from Europe. It was the kind of store where prices were never displayed on the items, because if you had to ask how much it cost, you clearly did not belong there. Vanessa stepped out of the black car and walked through the heavy glass doors of the boutique. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive leather and lavender that permeated the air. The store was sparsely populated, but every single woman inside was dressed in designer clothing and sporting massive diamond rings. This was exactly where Vanessa wanted to be. This was the elite social echelon she had betrayed her best friend to reach. A sales associate named Julian approached her immediately, offering her a glass of sparkling water with a twist of lemon. Vanessa accepted it gracefully. She made sure to rest her hand gently on her pregnant belly to ensure he noticed she was expecting twins. She spent the next hour walking through the pristine showroom, pointing at items with absolute authority. She was playing the role of the wealthy tech founder's wife perfectly. She selected a matching pair of hand-carved Italian cribs, painted in a soft ivory finish. She chose a custom gliding chair upholstered in imported crushed velvet and a massive changing table made of sustainable mahogany. She added designer silk blankets, cashmere swaddles, and a custom crystal chandelier for the nursery ceiling. She even booked a high-priced artist to paint a custom mural on the nursery wall. The total bill came to just over $15,000. Vanessa did not even blink at the astronomical number. To her, $15,000 was just a tiny drop in the bucket of Connor's impending venture capital funding. She felt invincible. She walked up to the sleek marble checkout counter with a triumphant and glowing smile. 2 other expectant mothers were standing nearby, finalizing their own exorbitant purchases. Vanessa made sure to speak loudly enough for them to hear her order total. She wanted them to know she was casually dropping 15 grand on nursery furniture on a random Monday morning. She opened her designer handbag and confidently pulled out a heavy metal corporate platinum credit card. The card was directly linked to the primary business accounts of Apex Innovations. Connor had given it to her with strict instructions to buy whatever she wanted to make the twins' nursery absolutely perfect. She handed the heavy metal card to the cashier, who took it with a polite smile and swiped it through the terminal. Vanessa turned to one of the other mothers and struck up an unsolicited conversation about hiring an exclusive night nurse from a premium agency. She was so busy showing off and playing her part that she almost did not hear the small negative beep from the credit card machine. The cashier frowned slightly and looked down at the computer screen. "I am sorry, madam," the cashier said, her voice polite but carrying a hint of strain. "It seems this card has been declined." Vanessa stopped talking mid-sentence. She snapped her head back toward the register, her perfect smile freezing on her face. The two wealthy mothers next to her also went completely silent, turning their attention to the unfolding scene. A heavy and awkward tension instantly filled the high-end boutique. "Declined." Vanessa scoffed, letting out a sharp and condescending laugh. She waved her hand dismissively at the terminal. "That is completely impossible. That is a corporate platinum card with no preset spending limit. The account holds millions. Run it again. Your machine is obviously malfunctioning." The cashier nodded apologetically and ran the heavy metal card through the terminal a second time. The machine emitted the exact same negative beep. The red light flashed on the screen, confirming the rejection. "I am very sorry, madam," the cashier repeated, pushing the card back across the cold marble counter. "The terminal says the account is frozen. Do you perhaps have another form of payment we could use to cover the $15,000 balance today?" Vanessa felt a sudden rush of heat flood her cheeks. Her face turned a bright and embarrassing shade of crimson. The other mothers in the store were now openly staring at her. They were exchanging knowing glances and whispering to each other behind their manicured hands. In their exclusive social circle, a declined credit card was the ultimate mark of shame. It meant you were a fraud pretending to have wealth you did not actually possess. It meant you did not belong. Vanessa quickly dug back into her designer handbag. Her hands were shaking slightly as her fingers fumbled past her lip gloss and keys. She pulled out a second credit card. This one was a personal gold card, also tied directly to Connor's accounts. She slapped it down on the counter. "Use this one," Vanessa demanded. Her voice had lost its previous elegant confidence and was taking on a shrill, desperate edge. "The bank is probably just putting a security hold on the corporate card, because it is a large purchase out of state. Just use the personal card." The cashier picked up the gold card and swiped it. The machine beeped negatively again. Vanessa felt her stomach drop completely. A cold sweat broke out across the back of her neck. She pulled out a third card, then a fourth. She threw them onto the marble counter in a blind panic. "Swipe them all," she ordered, her voice rising in pitch, echoing loudly in the quiet store. "Swipe every single one of them. There is plenty of money. My fiancé is a chief executive officer." The cashier patiently swiped the remaining cards one by one. Every single one was instantly declined. The negative beeps sounded like tiny alarms broadcasting her failure to the entire room. The situation had escalated from an awkward retail transaction into a full-blown public spectacle. The boutique manager walked over to the register, sensing the rising tension and the disruption to the store's peaceful atmosphere. The two wealthy mothers had completely stopped their own transactions to watch Vanessa humiliate herself. They were looking at her with undisguised pity and judgment. "Ma'am," the boutique manager said, stepping in front of the cashier and placing a firm hand on the counter. "I am going to have to ask you to please step aside. Your payment methods are all coming back as invalid, and you are holding up the line for our other clients. If you would like to call your financial institution to resolve the holds, you may do so outside. But we cannot process this order for you today." "Step aside," Vanessa hissed, her voice vibrating with pure indignation and terror. "Do you know who my fiancé is? He is the founder of Apex Innovations. We are about to close a multi-million-dollar funding round. We could buy this entire store and fire everyone in it." The boutique manager maintained a professional and completely unsympathetic smile. "I am sure you could, ma'am," the manager replied coldly, gesturing toward the exit. "But right now you cannot even afford to buy a receiving blanket. Please step aside and let our paying customers finish their transactions." Vanessa gasped. She grabbed her useless credit cards off the marble counter, scraping her nails against the stone. Tears of absolute mortification pricked the corners of her eyes. She could hear the other mothers openly stifling their laughter behind her back. She turned on her heel and stormed out of the boutique, pushing the heavy glass doors open with far too much force. She marched out onto the busy city sidewalk, her chest heaving with aggressive and panicked breaths. She had never been so thoroughly humiliated in her entire life. She felt like an absolute imposter exposed for the whole world to see. She immediately pulled out her cell phone and dialed Connor's number. She paced back and forth on the concrete, gripping the phone so tightly, her knuckles turned stark white. He answered on the third ring. His voice sounded strained and breathless, but Vanessa was far too angry to notice his underlying panic. "Connor, what the hell is wrong with your bank accounts?" Vanessa screamed right into the receiver, completely ignoring the pedestrians walking past her on the street. "I just tried to buy the nursery furniture, and every single card you gave me was declined. The cashier told me to step aside like I was some kind of peasant. I was publicly humiliated in front of half the neighborhood. You need to call your wealth manager and fix this bank error right now." There was a heavy and agonizing silence on the other end of the line. Connor was sitting in his apartment watching his entire company dissolve into nothingness, but he could not bring himself to tell her the truth. He could not admit that Diana had stripped him of every single penny and left him functionally bankrupt. "It is just a routine fraud alert, Vanessa." Connor lied, his voice trembling slightly, despite his effort to sound calm. "It is an automated security measure. The bank saw a $15,000 charge from a baby boutique, and they flagged it as suspicious activity because it is outside our normal spending patterns. I am already on the phone with the corporate fraud department clearing it up. Just go home. I will have all the cards unlocked by tomorrow morning. I promise." Vanessa stopped pacing. She stood completely still on the crowded sidewalk, oblivious to the people brushing past her shoulders. Something in Connor's voice did not sound right. He sounded terrified. He sounded exactly like a man who was desperately trying to cover up a massive failure. The memory of Linda dropping her champagne glass at dinner suddenly flashed through Vanessa's mind. She remembered the look of pure terror on her future mother-in-law's face when the process server had arrived. She remembered the strange mention of Diana. A cold and creeping suspicion began to take root deep in Vanessa's chest. She looked down at the useless plastic credit cards clutched in her trembling hand. A routine fraud alert did not freeze 4 different credit cards across 3 different financial institutions simultaneously. Connor was lying to her. He was hiding something massive. And for the first time since she betrayed her best friend to steal a wealthy lifestyle, Vanessa realized she might have made a catastrophic and irreversible mistake. The wealthy dream she thought she had stolen was beginning to look exactly like a nightmare. Connor ended the call with Vanessa and threw his cell phone across the glass dining table. The device clattered against the surface but did not break. He stood alone in his luxury apartment, breathing heavily. The walls were closing in on him rapidly. His bank accounts were frozen solid. His vendors were abandoning his company en masse. His pregnant mistress was currently having a complete meltdown on a crowded city sidewalk because her platinum credit cards were declining at a baby boutique. It was all falling apart. But Connor simply refused to accept defeat. He was a tech founder. He was a visionary. He convinced himself that Diana was just playing a high-stakes game of intimidation. She wanted him to crawl back to her and beg for forgiveness. She wanted to feel powerful because he had bruised her fragile ego during the divorce proceedings the day before. He decided he was not going to cower in his apartment and wait for his empire to be liquidated by a scorned woman. He was going to go directly to her office and put an immediate end to this ridiculous charade. He would march into her boring accounting firm stand, over her gray cubicle, and threaten her with absolute legal ruin. He would remind her that he was the one destined for true greatness. He grabbed his keys from the counter and stormed out the door. He convinced himself that the default notice was just a piece of paper designed to cause panic. He convinced himself that she was still the quiet and submissive wife who managed the household chores while he did the real work. He refused to believe that the woman who cooked his dinners was capable of orchestrating his financial demise. He pulled the office address from the legal documents he had received the night before. He fully expected the navigation system to lead him to a mundane corporate park or a low-rent office building on the outskirts of town. He pictured a place where mid-level financial consultants crunched numbers under flickering fluorescent lights. Instead, the global positioning system guided him directly into the absolute epicenter of the financial district. Connor pulled his car up to the curb and put the vehicle in park. He stared through the windshield in complete confusion. Standing before him was a towering skyscraper made entirely of mirrored glass and brushed steel. It was one of the most exclusive and expensive pieces of commercial real estate in the entire city. It was the kind of building where global hedge funds and billionaire investment bankers operated. There was no way Diana worked in a place like this. He assumed she must have rented a temporary conference room or used a virtual office address just to make the legal notices look more intimidating. He tossed his keys to the valet standing outside the revolving glass doors. He marched into the grand lobby with a deep scowl on his face. The interior of the building was breathtaking. The floors were cut from seamless white marble that reflected the morning light. The air smelled of expensive cologne and polished stone. A sleek digital directory spanning 10 feet wide glowed brightly against the far wall. Connor walked directly up to the sprawling marble reception desk. A polished security concierge looked up at him with a polite but entirely impassive expression. "I need to see Diana right now," Connor demanded, slamming his hand down flat on the marble surface. "She works here as a financial consultant. Tell her to come down to the lobby immediately. I do not have time to wait around for her to finish updating her spreadsheets." The concierge did not flinch at his aggressive tone. She simply looked at him and calmly asked for his name and proper identification. "My name is Connor, and I am her husband. Well, her ex-husband as of yesterday afternoon." Connor snapped impatiently, shifting his weight from side to side. "Just call up to whatever cubicle she is hiding in and tell her I am here to discuss the fraudulent default notice she had served to my company." The concierge typed something quickly into her computer terminal. She looked back up at him. Her voice remained perfectly modulated and strictly professional. "Sir, you are not on the approved visitor list for the penthouse level. I cannot allow you past the security turnstiles. If you do not have a scheduled appointment, I must ask you to step away from the desk and leave the premises." Connor let out a harsh and mocking laugh. "The penthouse level." He repeated, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "You have got to be kidding me. She does not work in the penthouse. She is a low-level consultant. She balances checkbooks. Look at the building directory. Just look up her name." He turned around and pointed aggressively at the massive digital screen glowing on the marble wall behind him. He marched over to the directory, intending to prove the concierge wrong. He scanned the alphabetical list of corporate tenants occupying the towering skyscraper. He passed the names of international law firms and global banking conglomerates. His eyes scanned up to the very top of the list, representing the highest and most expensive floor in the building. His breath hitched sharply in his throat. He stopped breathing entirely. Listed on the directory in bold silver letters was Vanguard Capital Partners. Beside the company name occupying the entire penthouse suite was a single line of text that caused Connor's entire reality to shatter into a million jagged pieces. Founder and Chief Executive Officer Diana. He stared at the glowing letters on the screen. He read them over and over again. The words burned deeply into his retinas. Founder, Chief Executive Officer, Penthouse Suite. Diana was not a mid-level consultant. She did not sit in a gray cubicle. She was not balancing budgets for middle management. She was the absolute apex predator of the venture capital world. She was the one who funded the empires. She was the one who decided which companies lived and which companies died. She commanded the top floor of the most intimidating building in the city. The crushing weight of his own profound stupidity hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He had spent his entire marriage talking down to a woman who possessed more wealth power and business acumen than he could ever dream of achieving. He had brought his pregnant mistress into a divorce proceeding and bragged about a multi-million-dollar funding round to the exact billionaire who was quietly orchestrating his financial execution. He realized with terrifying clarity that she had not just bought his debt. She owned him. His aggressive denial rapidly morphed into an explosive and uncontainable rage. His fragile ego could not process the sheer magnitude of his public humiliation. He spun around to face the security desk again. His face was flushed a dark crimson, and his hands were curled into tight, trembling fists. "Diana!" Connor roared at the top of his lungs. His voice echoed violently across the pristine marble lobby, bouncing off the high ceilings. "Get down here right now. You cannot do this to me. You cannot steal my company." The polished and professional atmosphere of the lobby instantly shattered. Business executives in expensive suits stopped walking and stared at the raving man causing a scene. 3 large security guards immediately stepped forward from their posts, converging on Connor from different angles. They moved with silent military precision, ready to physically drag him out through the revolving doors and toss him onto the street. Connor completely ignored them. He kept screaming her name, demanding that she face him. He shouted that she was a liar and a thief and a coward. He wildly waved his arms, causing the security guards to close the distance even faster. Suddenly, a distinct and melodic chime rang out through the lobby. Everyone turned to look. The heavy brushed steel doors of the private express elevator slid open smoothly. The shouting died instantly in Connor's throat. He stood frozen in place, his mouth hanging slightly open. Diana stepped out of the elevator. She was wearing a perfectly tailored designer suit that radiated absolute authority and power. She was flanked on her right side by Arthur, her lead attorney, and on her left side by her personal head of security. She looked impeccable, untouchable, and completely unfazed by the pathetic chaos unfolding in the lobby. She stopped walking and looked across the expansive marble floor. She locked eyes with Connor. She did not look angry or upset or intimidated. She simply looked down at him, the exact way a person looks at an insignificant and annoying insect right before they step on it. He realized in that devastating second that he had absolutely no leverage. He was entirely at her mercy, and she possessed absolutely no mercy for him at all. Connor stood entirely paralyzed as Diana approached him. The 3 large security guards who had been ready to drag him onto the street immediately stepped back and lowered their hands out of deep respect for their chief executive officer. The vast marble lobby of the financial district skyscraper grew completely silent. The wealthy investment bankers and corporate lawyers who had paused to watch the commotion now watched with bated breath. They recognized Diana. They knew her reputation as a ruthless and brilliant venture capitalist. They also recognized a man who was about to be utterly destroyed. Diana walked across the polished marble floor with a slow and deliberate pace. Her heels clicked sharply against the stone, echoing in the quiet space. She did not look angry. She did not look vindictive. She looked like a predator analyzing a trapped prey. Arthur, her lead attorney, walked one step behind her right shoulder, holding a thick black leather binder. The head of security walked behind her left shoulder, scanning Connor for any sudden movements. Connor tried to speak, but his throat was completely dry. He opened his mouth to shout another threat or demand an explanation, but the words simply dissolved into a pathetic gasp. He was standing in the very center of her empire. He had driven here expecting to intimidate a weak and subservient wife. Instead, he was facing a titan of the financial industry who had quietly orchestrated his absolute ruin. Diana stopped exactly 3 feet away from him. She looked him up and down, taking in his wrinkled t-shirt, his disheveled hair, and the wild panic shining in his eyes. "You are making a mess in my lobby, Connor." Diana said, her voice smooth and entirely devoid of any emotion. "I suggest you lower your voice before I have my security team escort you directly to the local police precinct." Connor swallowed hard. His hands were shaking violently at his sides. "Diana, you cannot do this," he pleaded, his previous arrogance entirely replaced by begging. "You cannot just freeze my entire life. Apex Innovations is my company. I built it from the ground up. You have no right to shut down my vendors and lock my bank accounts. We can negotiate a proper settlement. We can work this out like adults." Diana did not smile. She did not blink. She simply raised her right hand slightly. Arthur immediately stepped forward and handed her the thick black leather binder. It was heavy and bound with brass rivets. The front cover bore the official embossed logo of Vanguard Capital Partners. Diana held the binder out toward him. "Take it," she commanded. Connor stared at the black folder as if it were a venomous snake. He slowly raised his trembling hands and took the heavy binder from her grasp. "Open it," Diana instructed, her tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Connor opened the heavy leather cover. The first page was an official summary of a comprehensive corporate forensic audit. His eyes darted across the bold red numbers and the stark legal warnings. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. "You do not have a company, Connor." Diana said, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet lobby, so that every single bystander could hear the absolute truth. "You have a fraudulent scheme propped up entirely by my capital. That binder contains the complete and unredacted financial audit of Apex Innovations conducted by my internal accounting team over the past 3 weeks. We have documented every single transaction, every false projection, and every fabricated user metric you have ever created." Connor stared at the pages in pure horror. The audit detailed things he thought were completely hidden. "Let us review your brilliant business acumen," Diana continued, her tone sharp and clinical. "You claimed you were generating organic user growth. The audit proves you were using corporate funds to purchase fake user accounts from offshore click farms to artificially inflate your engagement numbers. You told your vendors you had millions in reserve capital. The audit proves you were operating at a massive net loss every single month. Your entire revenue model is a complete fabrication designed to trick investors into giving you more cash." "That is not true," Connor stammered weakly, closing the binder. "This is a targeted smear campaign. I have legitimate intellectual property. You have absolutely nothing," Diana countered, taking a step closer to him. Her presence was overwhelmingly intimidating. "And your corporate fraud is only the beginning of your problems, Connor. Let us talk about your personal misappropriation of my venture capital funds." Connor felt the blood drain entirely from his face. He knew exactly what she was about to say. Arthur stepped forward and handed Diana a single sheet of paper printed with a precise, itemized list. Diana held the paper up and began reading the figures aloud with surgical precision. "You used your corporate platinum card, the one directly funded by my anonymous cash injections, to finance your illicit affair with Vanessa," Diana stated clearly. "You spent $12,000 on a luxury vacation to Cabo San Lucas last October, classifying it as a technology conference expense. You spent $8,000 on diamond jewelry from a boutique downtown, classifying it as client retention gifts. You spent $25,000 on private helicopter charters to Napa Valley, classifying them as executive travel." Connor looked around the lobby in utter panic. The wealthy executives and corporate lawyers were staring at him with undisguised disgust. In their world business, failure was common, but stealing venture capital to fund a mistress was an unforgivable sin. He was being publicly and professionally executed. "It was my company," Connor protested, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "I am the founder. I am allowed to allocate executive compensation as I see fit. You cannot police my personal life. I am the primary creditor holding a multi-million-dollar defaulted loan," Diana replied, her eyes narrowing with cold fury. "I can police every single penny you have ever touched. You stole my money to cheat on me with my best friend. You used the capital I provided to buy her expensive dinners and luxury vacations, while I sat at home making sure your household bills were paid. You brought her into a divorce proceeding and bragged to my face about a funding round that I was personally orchestrating. You are not just a terrible husband, Connor. You are a phenomenally stupid criminal." Connor dropped his gaze to the marble floor. He could not look at her anymore. The reality of his situation was crushing him. He was completely trapped. He had no money, he had no company, he had no future. His entire existence had been dismantled by the very woman he had called weak and boring. Diana took the single sheet of paper and placed it back into Arthur's hands. She looked down at Connor with a level of disdain that was absolute and unwavering. "I am going to make this very simple for you. Diana said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low register. This is not a negotiation. This is an ultimatum. You have exactly until Friday night at 5 o'clock to comply with my demands. Connor slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red and filled with tears of pure panic. What demands? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. You are going to completely liquidate Apex Innovations, Diana instructed. You are going to sign over every single patent, every trademark, and every piece of intellectual property to Vanguard Capital Partners. You are going to surrender the remaining balance of your corporate accounts, and you are going to formally dissolve the business entity. You will walk away with absolutely nothing. You will not retain a single share of equity. You will not attempt to start a competing business. You will surrender your entire fraudulent empire to me by Friday night. Connor gasped. You cannot do that! He cried out, clutching the heavy audit binder against his chest. If I surrender the company, I have nothing left. I will be bankrupt. Vanessa is having twins. I need that equity to survive. You are trying to leave me with absolutely nothing. Diana tilted her head slightly. A cold and humorless smile touched the corners of her mouth. If you do not sign the liquidation agreements by Friday night at 5 o'clock. Diana continued, her tone turning completely merciless. I will take the original commercial loan documents directly to the district attorney. I will hand them the undeniable proof that you forged your parents' signatures on a massive federal financial agreement. I will give them this complete forensic audit detailing your wire fraud, your bank fraud, and your gross misappropriation of corporate funds. Connor stopped breathing. The mention of the forged parental loan documents hit him like a physical blow. He had completely forgotten about the criminal aspect of his initial funding. If I take those documents to the district attorney, Diana stated clearly, you will not just face bankruptcy, Connor. You will face a guaranteed federal prison sentence. You will spend the next 20 years in a maximum security facility for defrauding a financial institution and forging legal signatures. Your parents will lose their home to the bank, and your precious twins will grow up visiting you behind a glass partition. Connor stood frozen in the center of the pristine marble lobby. His legs felt like they were made of lead. The heavy leather binder in his hands felt like an anchor dragging him down into the darkest depths of the ocean. He was completely out of options. He could not fight her in court because she had undeniable proof of his felonies. He could not appeal to her mercy because he had spent their entire marriage treating her with absolute cruelty. He had mocked her. He had cheated on her. He had paraded his pregnant mistress in front of her. You have until Friday, Diana said, turning away from him. Arthur will email the surrender documents to whatever cheap lawyer you can find who is willing to work for free. I suggest you sign them quickly. If I do not have your signature by 5 o'clock, I make the phone call, and your life is officially over. Diana did not wait for his response. She did not need to hear him beg or plead or try to apologize. She simply turned her back on him and walked toward the private express elevator. Arthur and the head of security followed closely behind her. The heavy brushed steel doors slid open with a soft chime. She stepped inside and turned around to face the lobby as the doors began to close. Connor stood alone on the polished marble floor, clutching the audit of his own destruction. The wealthy executives and lawyers in the lobby stared at him in complete silence. He was a broken and ruined man. He watched the elevator doors slide shut, sealing Diana away in her impenetrable penthouse empire. The reality of his absolute defeat settled heavily over his shoulders. He had absolutely nowhere to run. Connor stumbled out of the mirrored glass building and onto the bustling sidewalk of the financial district. His hands were still trembling as he gripped the heavy black binder. The cold wind bit at his face, but he barely felt it. His mind was racing through a labyrinth of pure and aggressive denial. He refused to accept that Diana had beaten him. He refused to sign the liquidation agreements and hand over his entire life by Friday at 5 o'clock. He was a survivor. He was a disruptor. He just needed capital. If he could find an outside investor to inject emergency cash into Apex Innovations, he could pay off the defaulted loan and escape her trap entirely. He just needed one massive bailout. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. He dialed every contact he had ever schmoozed at every networking event. Most of his calls went straight to voicemail. The vendors had already spread the word of his insolvency. But Connor was relentless. He finally reached a mid-level event promoter who owed him a favor from 2 years ago. Connor cashed in his very last chip. He demanded 2 VIP tickets to the Silicon Summit Gala scheduled for Thursday night. It was the most exclusive technology industry event of the year. Every major venture capitalist and angel investor in the city would be sitting in that ballroom. It was his absolute last chance to find a rival firm willing to buy out his debt. He returned to his luxury apartment and lied directly to Vanessa's face. He told her the frozen credit cards were just a temporary glitch caused by their incoming funding. He told her they were going to the gala to celebrate their success and lock in their new partners. Vanessa bought the lie instantly. She spent Thursday afternoon having her hair and makeup professionally done, eager to show off her status to the city's elite. Thursday night arrived with a heavy downpour of rain, but inside the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel, the atmosphere was entirely insulated by extreme wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the tables. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with trays of expensive caviar and vintage champagne. The room was packed with billionaires, software magnates, and the highest echelon of the city's financial sector. Connor walked through the heavy velvet doors, adjusting his bow tie. He was sweating profusely despite the cool air conditioning. The black binder of his fraudulent audit was locked in the trunk of his car, but its weight still sat heavily on his chest. He had less than 24 hours until Diana's deadline. He needed to secure at least $10 million before midnight. He turned to Vanessa. She was wearing a stunning emerald green maternity gown that she had purchased using a backup credit card she opened in her own name. She looked radiant and completely oblivious to the impending threat of federal prison hovering over her fiancé's head. "I need to work the room, Vanessa." Connor set his voice tight with suppressed panic. "I need to speak privately with a few key executives about our Series B funding. Go mingle with the wives. Show them we belong here." Vanessa smiled brightly and patted his chest. "Go get them, baby," she said, kissing his cheek. "Secure our millions." Connor darted into the crowd, looking like a desperate man searching for a life raft. He targeted a group of rival venture capitalists standing near the private bar. He approached them with a fake, confident smile. He launched into his pitch, deliberately lying about his user metrics and revenue projections. He offered them an absurd amount of equity for an immediate cash injection. He begged them to bypass standard due diligence, claiming he had a narrow window to close the deal. The investors looked at him with polite skepticism. They exchanged wary glances. In their world, desperation smelled like a rotting carcass. Connor pushed harder, talking faster and sweating through his expensive shirt. He was pitching a dead company to sharks, and the sharks were simply waiting for him to drown. While Connor was fighting for his actual freedom, Vanessa was busy fighting for social dominance. She glided across the plush carpet of the ballroom, aiming directly for a cluster of wealthy wives standing near the towering ice sculpture. She recognized the wife of a prominent software billionaire and immediately inserted herself into their conversation. Vanessa rested her hand dramatically on her pregnant belly. She laughed loudly at a joke someone made, ensuring the entire circle noticed her presence. She introduced herself as the future wife of Connor, the founder of Apex Innovations. "Oh yes," one of the wives said politely. "I think my husband mentioned that company. You guys are in the middle of fundraising." Vanessa smiled a massive and predatory smile. "We are actually closing our Series B round next week," she bragged, her voice carrying clearly over the soft jazz music playing in the background. "We are looking at a valuation well over $40 million. Connor is just so brilliant. He works constantly. But of course, it takes a strong woman behind the scenes to keep a man like that grounded." The other women nodded, murmuring their polite agreements. Vanessa felt a massive rush of superiority. She was finally running in the circles she had always craved. She could not resist the urge to elevate herself by tearing down the woman she had betrayed. Connor was actually married before. Vanessa continued, leaning in close as if sharing a juicy piece of society gossip. It was a complete disaster. His ex-wife was this terribly boring financial consultant. She was completely plain. She wore gray suits every single day and had absolutely zero ambition. She just sat in a cubicle crunching numbers. She did not understand his genius at all. She was constantly holding him back because she was intimidated by his potential. The billionaire's wife raised an eyebrow, looking mildly interested in the drama. That sounds exhausting. It was pathetic, honestly. Vanessa scoffed, taking a sip of sparkling water. She was so cold and rigid. She did not even want to have a family. She just wanted to balance checkbooks. Connor finally realized he needed to cut the dead weight if he was ever going to build his empire. He left her with absolutely nothing in the divorce on Monday. She just rolled over and signed the papers because she knew she could never compete in our world. She simply did not have the stomach for it. Now he finally has a real woman by his side. Vanessa laughed, a high-pitched and cruel sound. She basked in the attention, feeling like the absolute winner of a game Diana did not even know she was playing. She had the man. She had the twins. She was about to have the massive fortune. She felt completely untouchable. On the other side of the ballroom, Connor was striking out completely. He had pitched 6 different investors, and every single one had politely declined. His collar was soaked with sweat. His hands were shaking. He checked his watch. It was 8 o'clock. He was running out of time. His heart hammered against his ribs as he scanned the room for any other potential targets, trying to suppress the bile rising in his throat. Suddenly, the soft jazz music faded away. The bright crystal chandeliers dimmed slightly, signaling a transition in the evening's events. A hush fell over the crowded ballroom as the wealthy guests turned their attention toward the large stage at the front of the room. The host of the gala, a distinguished older man in a sharp tuxedo, walked up to the sleek acrylic podium. He tapped the microphone twice. A sharp feedback sound echoed through the silent hall, demanding everyone's complete attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host began, his voice resonating powerfully through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for joining us tonight at the Silicon Summit. We are gathered here to celebrate innovation vision and the ruthless pursuit of excellence in the technology sector. Tonight we have a very special privilege." Connor stopped pacing. He stood near the back bar, wiping his forehead with a cocktail napkin. Vanessa turned away from the circle of wives, her eyes fixed on the stage. "We are honored to welcome our keynote speaker for the evening." The host continued, gesturing toward the heavy velvet curtains on the side of the stage. "This person is an absolute titan in our industry. She is a pioneer of ethical investing and a master of corporate restructuring. Her boutique venture capital firm just finalized a massive and highly confidential acquisition this week, cementing her status as the most influential and formidable investor in this entire city." Connor felt a strange and icy chill crawl up his spine. The description sounded vaguely familiar, but his panicked brain could not process the information. He just wanted the speech to end so he could get back to begging for his life. Vanessa smiled, clapping her hands politely along with the rest of the wealthy crowd. She loved listening to successful people talk. She imagined Connor standing on that exact stage next year, giving his own keynote speech while she watched from the front row in a diamond necklace. "Please join me in welcoming the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Capital Partners." The host announced, his voice rising with excitement. The name dropped like a live grenade into Connor's ears. Vanguard Capital Partners. The room suddenly began to spin. The air was violently sucked out of his lungs. He dropped his cocktail napkin onto the carpet. He tried to take a step backward, but his legs refused to move. He was completely paralyzed. The heavy velvet curtains parted. A bright and piercing spotlight hit the center of the stage, illuminating the microphone stand. The crowd erupted into a thunderous and respectful applause. The billionaires and the software magnates clapped enthusiastically, eager to hear from the undisputed apex predator of their industry. Diana stepped out of the shadows and walked into the blinding light. She was wearing a stunning midnight blue gown that radiated absolute power and flawless elegance. Her posture was perfectly straight. Her expression was calm, commanding, and entirely merciless. She walked up to the acrylic podium and adjusted the microphone. She looked out over the sea of wealthy faces, her gaze sweeping across the massive ballroom with the confidence of a monarch surveying her kingdom. Vanessa stopped clapping. Her hands froze in midair. Her jaw dropped slightly as she stared at the stage. The smug and arrogant smile she had been wearing all night completely melted off her face. She blinked several times, trying to convince herself that it was a trick of the light. She looked at the billionaire's wife standing next to her. The woman was clapping loudly, her eyes fixed on Diana with profound admiration. Diana stood at the podium and let the applause wash over her. She did not look like a boring financial consultant. She did not look like dead weight. She looked like the single most powerful person in the entire building. She rested her hands on the edges of the podium and leaned forward slightly, preparing to deliver a speech that would execute Connor's entire existence in front of the most important people in the city. "Good evening, everyone," Diana said into the microphone. Her voice was smooth and perfectly calibrated. It carried across the massive ballroom with an effortless authority. The chatter in the room ceased completely. The elite members of the city financial sector gave her their undivided attention. "Tonight I want to talk to you about the architecture of an illusion. We work in an industry that praises the visionary. We reward the disruptor. But in our eagerness to fund the next great empire, we sometimes blind ourselves to the glaring reality of a parasite." Connor felt a drop of sweat roll down the side of his neck. His collar suddenly felt incredibly tight. He reached up and pulled at his bow tie, trying to draw a full breath into his burning lungs. He stared at the stage in absolute horror. Diana walked out from behind the acrylic podium. She held a wireless microphone in her hand, pacing the stage with the predatory grace of a lioness. "There is a specific breed of founder in our current market." Diana continued, her tone turning conversational but sharp. "This founder is entirely hollow. They build their companies not on solid code or sustainable revenue models, but on arrogant delusion. They believe that if they play the part of a successful executive, the market will simply bow to their desires. But numbers do not care about a tailored suit. Spreadsheets do not care about a charismatic smile. And as investors, it is our absolute duty to spot these frauds before they drain our portfolios." The crowd nodded in agreement. A few billionaires in the front row chuckled at her sharp delivery. They thought she was delivering a brilliant and metaphorical case study. They believed she was sharing the seasoned wisdom of a top-tier venture capitalist. Only Connor knew the absolute and terrifying truth. She was not giving a hypothetical lecture, she was reading the autopsy report of his life. "Let us examine the anatomy of a fake founder," Diana said, pausing in the center of the stage. The spotlight illuminated her midnight blue gown. "First, they secure their initial capital through deception. Perhaps they falsify their revenue projections. Or perhaps they sink to the level of forging foundational loan documents, using the estate of their own family members as collateral to hide their lack of personal assets." Connor stopped breathing. His hands began to shake violently. He looked around the ballroom in a blind panic. He expected the police to storm through the heavy velvet doors at any second. He expected the crowd to turn and point at him, but the wealthy guests simply listened with rapt attention, completely unaware that the criminal she described was standing right in the middle of their cocktail hour. "Second," Diana stated, holding up 2 fingers. "They engage in massive operational fraud. When organic user acquisition fails, they do not pivot or innovate. They use corporate venture capital to purchase fake engagement from offshore click farms. They artificially inflate their metrics to trick future investors into bailing them out. They construct a house of cards and pray that nobody opens the front door." Connor felt his knees buckle slightly. He reached out and gripped the edge of a high-top cocktail table to keep himself from collapsing onto the carpet. Every single word was a precise and surgical strike. She was publicly listing the exact contents of the heavy black audit binder she had handed him in the lobby yesterday. She was dismantling his entire fraudulent existence piece by piece in front of the most powerful people in the industry. "And finally," Diana said, her voice dropping to a low and dangerous register, "they misappropriate corporate funds for their own selfish desires. They use anonymous angel investments to finance luxury vacations to Cabo San Lucas. They buy expensive diamond jewelry under the guise of client retention. They use company money to fund illicit affairs, believing they are too smart to ever get caught. They treat venture capital like a personal piggy bank because they lack the moral fiber required to be a true leader. A low murmur rippled through the ballroom. The investors shook their heads in disgust at the hypothetical founder she described. In their world, squandering investment capital on personal vices was the ultimate unforgivable sin. It was the mark of a complete amateur. Connor stumbled away from the table. He needed to get out of the room. He needed to find a place to hide. He turned around and bumped right into the group of rival venture capitalists he had been desperately pitching just 30 minutes ago. He had begged them for a $10 million cash injection. He had offered them an absurd amount of equity. The men did not even look at him. They were entirely focused on the stage. "She is absolutely ruthless tonight," one of the investors whispered to his colleague, taking a sip of his bourbon. "This is exactly why Vanguard Capital Partners is dominating the sector right now. She can spot a bad investment from a mile away. I heard she just liquidated a massive tech portfolio yesterday." The second investor replied quietly. "She triggered a morality clause and froze all the founders' assets overnight. The guy did not even see it coming. She completely gutted his operation in under 24 hours. That is why she is our chief executive officer. We are incredibly lucky to work for her." Connor felt the blood freeze in his veins. The realization hit him with the devastating force of a freight train. These men did not work for a rival firm. They worked for Vanguard Capital Partners. They worked for Diana. He had spent the entire evening begging his own wife's subordinate employees for a bailout. He had pitched his fraudulent and dying company to the exact people who had audited his bank accounts and frozen his assets that very morning. They had politely listened to his desperate lies, knowing the entire time that he was completely bankrupt. The humiliation was so profound and absolute that Connor thought he might actually vomit on the ballroom floor. Near the front of the room, Vanessa was experiencing her own psychological collapse. She was standing in the center of the circle of wealthy wives she had been trying to impress. Just moments ago, she had been loudly bragging about Connor's massive valuation and insulting Diana as a boring and weak woman. Now she was watching the woman she had betrayed command the entire room with flawless authority. The billionaire wife standing next to Vanessa turned to her with a look of polite curiosity. "Your fiancé runs a tech startup, right?" the woman asked, her voice carrying over the sound of Diana speaking. "Has his company ever pitched to Vanguard Capital Partners? Diana is clearly the person you want backing your enterprise. If she believes in a founder, she can make them an absolute fortune." Vanessa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her throat was completely dry. She looked up at the stage. She looked at the confidence radiating from Diana. She thought about her declined platinum credit cards at the baby boutique. She thought about Connor's frantic behavior all week. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in her mind with terrifying clarity. Connor did not own a successful empire. He was the fake founder Diana was describing to the crowd. He was the parasite who had forged documents and squandered his investors' money. And Diana was the one holding the axe over his neck. Vanessa realized she had hitched her entire life to a man who was hurtling toward federal prison. "When an investor finally spots a fraudulent founder," Diana said, bringing her speech to a powerful and commanding conclusion, "there is only one ethical move. You do not negotiate. You do not offer second chances to someone who steals from their backers and lies to their partners. You cut the dead weight immediately. You execute a total and uncompromising liquidation. You tear down the house of cards and you walk away cleanly." Diana smiled. It was a cold and sharp expression that sent a shiver through the entire room. "Thank you all for your time," Diana said into the microphone. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." The ballroom erupted. The applause was deafening. The crowd rose to their feet, delivering a massive standing ovation. The billionaires and software magnates cheered loudly, completely captivated by her brilliant presentation. They had no idea they had just witnessed a public execution. Diana handed the microphone back to the host and walked down the small set of stairs leading off the stage. The crowd instantly parted for her. Wealthy executives and prominent lawyers practically fell over themselves trying to clear a path. They looked at her with pure reverence. Connor saw his final opportunity slipping away. He looked across the room and spotted Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan was a billionaire tech mogul who specialized in high-risk corporate buyouts. He was the ultimate whale. He was the only person in the entire city with enough liquid capital and risk tolerance to potentially buy Connor's debt from Vanguard. Connor had spent the last 2 days trying to secure a 5-minute meeting with him. Connor took a deep breath and tried to compose his completely shattered nerves. He wiped his sweaty palms on his trousers. He pushed his way through the crowd, moving desperately toward the billionaire. He planned to intercept Jonathan and pitch the most aggressive buyout deal of his life. He would offer him 90% of Apex Innovations for enough cash to pay off Diana and stay out of prison. "Mr. Brooks!" Connor gasped, stepping into the man's path and holding out a trembling hand. "I am Connor from Apex Innovations. I urgently need to speak with you about a massive acquisition opportunity. It will only take 2 minutes of your time." Jonathan Brooks did not even break his stride. He did not look at Connor. He did not acknowledge the outstretched hand. He simply walked right past Connor as if he were completely invisible. He brushed past the desperate and sweating fraud without a single ounce of hesitation. Connor turned around and watched in absolute horror. He watched his very last lifeline walk directly toward the front of the room. Jonathan approached Diana as she stepped off the stage. The billionaire tech mogul smiled warmly and extended his hand to her. Diana accepted the handshake with polite professionalism. "Diana, that was an absolutely spectacular presentation," Jonathan said, his voice carrying clearly to where Connor stood paralyzed in the crowd. "I have a new corporate acquisition on the table next week, and I would deeply appreciate your guidance on the restructuring phase. Your instincts regarding fraudulent executives are completely unmatched in this city. I would love to defer to your expertise." "I would be happy to review the files, Jonathan," Diana replied smoothly. "Send the documents to my office on Monday." Connor stood frozen near the back bar. His entire world had just been completely dismantled. The investors he needed worked for his ex-wife. The billionaire he prayed would save him was actively seeking her advice. He was entirely trapped in a reality where Diana held all the power, all the money, and all the respect. There was absolutely no escape. Connor ripped his gaze away from the billionaire and stumbled toward the back of the ballroom. His chest heaved with every breath. He needed capital immediately. He scanned the remaining crowd and spotted a group of mid-level venture capitalists gathered near the mahogany bar. He recognized one of them from a pitch meeting last year. The man was a junior partner at a secondary firm. He was not a billionaire, but he had access to emergency funds. Connor grabbed a glass of bourbon from a passing waiter and swallowed it in one gulp. He forced his facial muscles into a mask of aggressive confidence. He marched directly toward the group. Vanessa spotted him from across the room. She excused herself from the circle of wealthy wives and began walking toward him. She wanted to stand by his side while he secured their future. She wanted to be seen as the vital partner of a successful tech founder. She approached quietly and stood just behind his right shoulder, listening as he launched into his desperate pitch. Connor cornered the junior partner against the polished wood of the bar. He did not wait for an introduction. He immediately started talking about Apex Innovations. He claimed his company was on the precipice of a massive expansion. He lied with the practiced ease of a career con artist. He told the group that his daily active user count had skyrocketed by 400% in the last quarter. He fabricated a story about a proprietary algorithm that was currently generating millions in organic ad revenue. He promised them a 20% equity stake if they could wire $10 million into his corporate accounts before midnight. He framed it as a rare opportunity to bypass the standard due diligence process and get in on the ground floor of a unicorn startup. The investors looked at him with polite skepticism. They swirled their drinks and exchanged hesitant glances. A $10 million cash injection without an audit was unheard of in their industry. Connor pushed harder. He raised his voice and talked over their objections. He sweated through his expensive suit jacket. He told them they were about to miss out on the greatest financial return of their careers. A calm and melodic voice suddenly cut through his frantic pitch. "Actually, those user metrics are entirely fabricated." Connor froze. His heart slammed against his ribs with terrifying force. The investors parted instantly to make way for the speaker, Diana stepped into the center of the circle. She held a crystal glass of sparkling water. Her midnight blue gown caught the light from the chandeliers. Her posture was flawless. She did not look angry. She wore a polite and completely professional smile. Diana took a sip of her water and turned her attention to the junior partner. She spoke with the absolute authority of a seasoned executive. Apex Innovations does not have an organic user base, Diana stated clearly. Connor has been using corporate funds to purchase fake engagement from offshore click farms. His actual daily active user count is less than 400 people. His proprietary algorithm does not exist. His company operates at a massive net loss every single month. Connor opened his mouth to shout a denial, but his vocal cords refused to work. He was completely paralyzed. Vanessa stood right behind him. Her smile vanished entirely. She stared at Diana in absolute shock. "You must be mistaken." Vanessa interjected, her voice trembling slightly. "Connor is closing a Series B funding round next week. We have a $40 million valuation." Diana looked at Vanessa for the first time all evening. The look of pity in Diana's eyes was absolutely devastating. "There is no Series B funding round, Vanessa," Diana replied smoothly. "There is only a multi-million-dollar commercial loan that is currently in severe default. I know this because my firm owns the debt. We conducted a comprehensive forensic audit of his entire operation 3 weeks ago. We uncovered systemic wire fraud and gross misappropriation of corporate funds. We froze every single one of his business accounts on Monday morning." The investors in the circle gasped audibly. They took a collective physical step away from Connor. In the venture capital world, a founder accused of wire fraud was radioactive. They treated him like a dangerous liability. They wanted absolutely no association with a man facing an active federal investigation. "He is lying to you." Diana continued, returning her focus to the investors. "He is standing here begging for $10 million because he needs to pay off the defaulted loan by tomorrow. I gave him a strict ultimatum yesterday afternoon. He must liquidate Apex Innovations entirely and surrender all remaining assets to my firm by Friday at 5 o'clock. If he fails to sign the surrender documents, I am handing the forged loan applications directly to the district attorney." The junior partner set his drink down on the bar. He looked at Connor with pure disgust. "You tried to hustle us into paying off your fraudulent debt," the investor said, his voice laced with anger. "You are completely finished in this city." The group of investors turned their backs on Connor and walked away immediately. They wanted to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the impending criminal charges. Diana gave Connor one last dismissive glance. She took another sip of her sparkling water and walked away to join the billionaire tech mogul waiting for her across the room. Connor was left standing completely alone near the bar. The grand illusion was entirely shattered. Every single lie he had ever told was now exposed to the brutal light of reality. Vanessa stood right behind him. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the bar to remain upright. The loud music and the chatter of the ballroom faded into a dull ringing in her ears. She had heard every single word. She had watched the investors recoil in horror. She finally understood why her credit cards had declined at the baby boutique. She understood why Connor had been sweating and pacing all week. He did not own a tech empire. He did not have millions in the bank. He was a broke and desperate fraud. His company was dead, and he was facing guaranteed jail time for forging federal documents. She had betrayed her loyal best friend and destroyed her own reputation to secure a wealthy future. Now she realized she had shackled herself to a sinking ship. She was pregnant with twins, and the man standing in front of her had absolutely nothing left to offer. Vanessa stepped out from the shadow of Connor's shoulder. The realization of her catastrophic miscalculation hit her with a physical force. She stared at the man she had betrayed her best friend for. He was not a visionary tech mogul. He was a sweating and trembling fraud clutching a cocktail napkin. The multi-million-dollar empire he had promised her was nothing but a mirage. The luxury nursery furniture, the designer maternity wear, and the planned baby moon to Europe were all built on stolen money. She felt a surge of absolute panic mixed with a violent, burning rage. She had thrown away a decade of loyal friendship for a life of luxury that did not actually exist. "You lied to me," Vanessa hissed, her voice trembling with rising fury. "You stood in our apartment and told me you were closing a $40 million funding round. You gave me a platinum credit card and told me to buy whatever I wanted. You told me Diana was just a pathetic consultant who had no idea how your business operated. You told me you were a millionaire, Connor. You told me we were going to be rich." Connor flinched, stepping back as if she had slapped him. He looked around the ballroom, desperately hoping nobody was listening to their conversation. But the wealthy guests had already noticed the commotion. They were watching the implosion of the fake founder with undisguised fascination. "Vanessa, keep your voice down," Connor pleaded, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "We can still fix this. I just need to find a bridge loan. I can talk to Diana. I can make a deal." "Make a deal?" Vanessa shrieked, abandoning any attempt at social decorum. Her voice echoed sharply across the quiet ballroom, cutting through the soft jazz music. "With what leverage, Connor? She owns your entire company. She owns the debt. You are facing federal prison for forging your own parents' signatures. You are completely bankrupt. There is no deal to be made. You dragged me onto a sinking ship and expected me to drown with you. You are a liar and a complete failure. You promised me a life of luxury, and all you have given me is a front-row seat to your own criminal prosecution." The surrounding billionaires and venture capitalists watched in silence as the pregnant woman absolutely dismantled the disgraced tech founder. Connor stood, completely frozen, unable to defend himself against the barrage of truth. His face was flushed with profound humiliation. He reached out to grab Vanessa's arm, trying to pull her away from the judging eyes of the city's elite, but Vanessa violently yanked her arm away. She looked at him with an expression of pure and unadulterated disgust. "Do not ever touch me again," Vanessa spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You manipulated me. You ruined my life, and you ruined the lives of these unborn twins. You are going to jail, Connor, and I am not going to wait around to watch you get locked in a cage. I am completely done with you." Vanessa did not wait for a response. She turned around and stormed toward the heavy velvet doors of the ballroom. She pushed past the wealthy executives and the staring wives, leaving Connor standing entirely alone in the center of his own public execution. The grand illusion was dead. The social climbing mistress had realized there was no money left to steal, and she had immediately abandoned the host. Connor watched her walk out the door, knowing he had lost his very last ally. The sun rose the next morning, casting a cold and gray light over the financial district. Friday had arrived, bringing the deadline for Connor's absolute surrender. But before the corporate liquidation could be finalized, Diana had one last piece of garbage to remove from her life. She sat at her massive mahogany desk in the penthouse suite, reviewing a stack of legal documents. The private elevator chimed softly. Her head of security walked into the office. He informed her that a woman was causing a scene in the lobby, demanding to speak with the chief executive officer. It was Vanessa. "Send her up," Diana instructed calmly, setting down her pen. "I will handle this personally." She leaned back in her leather chair and waited. 2 minutes later, the brushed steel doors of the elevator slid open. Vanessa stepped into the penthouse suite. She looked entirely different from the arrogant woman who had strutted through the gala the night before. Her makeup was slightly smudged. She wore a simple dark dress instead of a designer gown. She was carrying a box of tissues and actively sobbing as she walked into the executive office. "Diana," Vanessa cried out, rushing toward the mahogany desk. "Oh, Diana, I am so incredibly sorry. I had absolutely no idea what he was doing. You have to believe me. He manipulated me from the very beginning. He told me you two were separated. He lied to me about his finances. He lied about the company. I was completely brainwashed by him. I am a victim in this too, Diana. You have to understand that I would never intentionally hurt you. We were best friends." Diana did not speak. She simply watched the performance with a cold and clinical detachment. Vanessa stood in front of the desk, wiping crocodile tears from her eyes. She placed a hand on her pregnant stomach, playing the ultimate card of maternal desperation. "I have nothing, Diana," Vanessa sobbed, her shoulders shaking with manufactured grief. "Connor is bankrupt and facing prison. I am carrying twins and I have absolutely no way to support them. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I am begging you for help. For the sake of our past friendship, please help me financially. I just need a little bit of money to secure an apartment and buy supplies for the babies." The sheer audacity of the request was staggering. The woman who had slept with Diana's husband, helped him file for a ruthless divorce, and mocked her perceived weakness, was now standing in her penthouse suite, begging for a cash handout. Diana slowly leaned forward, resting her elbows on the polished wood of the desk. She looked directly into Vanessa's tear-filled eyes. The crying stopped instantly. Vanessa recognized the absolute lack of mercy radiating from the woman sitting across from her. "You are not a victim, Vanessa," Diana stated, her voice smooth and lethally precise. "You are a parasite who simply attached yourself to the wrong host. You thought you were stealing a billionaire, but you accidentally stole a fraudulent criminal. Now that the host is dead, you are trying to attach yourself back to me. That is not going to happen." "But Diana, I did not know." Vanessa pleaded, taking a step closer to the desk. "I swear to you I did not know he was broke. I thought he was a successful founder. I thought you were just holding him back. He lied to me about everything." Diana reached into the top drawer of her desk. She pulled out a thick stack of printed papers bound by a heavy metal clip. She placed the stack on the table and slowly slid it across the smooth mahogany surface until it stopped directly in front of Vanessa. "During the comprehensive forensic audit of Apex Innovations, my security team also conducted a full digital review of all corporate devices." Diana explained, her tone perfectly level. "That includes Connor's company-issued mobile phone, a phone that he used extensively to communicate with you over the past 12 months. Vanessa looked down at the stack of papers. The blood completely drained from her face. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. "Read the highlighted section on the first page," Diana commanded. "Read exactly what you texted my husband 6 months ago while I was attending a financial conference in London. Read it aloud, Vanessa." Vanessa's hands trembled as she picked up the top page. She stared at the highlighted text, but she could not bring herself to speak the words. The evidence of her own malice was staring right back at her. "Fine," Diana said, leaning back in her chair. "I will read it for you. You texted him, quote, 'I cannot wait until we finally cut that boring spreadsheet-obsessed wife of yours out of the picture entirely. Make sure you hide the offshore accounts before you file the divorce papers so she does not try to take half of your massive valuation,' unquote." The silence in the penthouse suite was absolutely deafening. Vanessa dropped the paper back onto the desk. Her fake tears had completely evaporated, leaving behind an expression of pure trapped terror. "You knew exactly what you were doing," Diana continued, her voice sharp and unrelenting. "You were not manipulated. You were a willing and eager participant in his scheme. You actively encouraged him to hide marital assets. You mocked me behind my back while smiling to my face. You did not love him. You loved the illusion of his wealth. You wanted a multi-million-dollar lifestyle, and you were perfectly happy to step on my neck to reach it." Diana stood up from her chair, drawing herself up to her full height. She looked down at her former best friend with utter disgust. "You came here today thinking you could play on my sympathy. You thought you could use those unborn children as a weapon to extract money from my firm. You underestimated me yesterday in the law office, and you are underestimating me right now. I am not the weak woman you thought you could easily discard. I am the woman who owns every single asset your child's father ever touched. I built this empire with my own intellect and my own capital while you spent your time plotting how to steal from me." "Please, Diana," Vanessa whispered, taking a step backward toward the elevator. "I have nothing left. The banks rejected my credit cards. My apartment lease is up next week. I cannot afford to raise twins on my own. You have millions of dollars. You would not even notice if you gave me a small settlement." "I would notice," Diana replied coldly. Because I do not fund traders, and I do not subsidize the lifestyle of a social climbing gold digger. Your financial ruin is the direct consequence of your own greed. You made your bed with a fraudulent criminal, and now you get to lie in it. You get to figure out how to raise those children on a minimum wage salary while their father sits in a federal prison cell. That is your reality now, Vanessa. Accept it. Diana pressed a silver button on her desk. The heavy doors of the penthouse suite opened immediately. Her head of security walked into the office, his expression entirely stoic. He stepped up behind Vanessa, placing himself between her and the exit. He did not need to say a word. His physical presence was a clear and non-negotiable command to leave the premises. "Get her out of my office," Diana instructed, not taking her eyes off Vanessa. "Escort her down to the lobby and inform the building management that she is permanently banned from this property. If she ever attempts to contact me or approaches this building again, you are to have her arrested for trespassing." The security guard placed a firm hand on Vanessa's arm and guided her toward the private elevator. Vanessa did not fight back. She did not scream or beg. The fight had been completely drained out of her. She looked at Diana one last time as the brushed steel doors began to close. She saw a woman who was entirely at peace with her decision. She saw a woman who had meticulously destroyed the people who had betrayed her. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing Vanessa away from the penthouse and the wealth she had desperately tried to steal. Diana stood alone in her quiet office. She looked down at the stack of printed text messages on her desk. She picked them up and dropped them directly into the shredder, listening to the sharp, grinding noise as the final remnants of her toxic friendship were reduced to worthless ribbons of paper. The parasite had been permanently removed. Friday afternoon arrived with a heavy blanket of gray clouds pressing down on the city. The deadline for Connor to completely surrender his fraudulent company was rapidly approaching, but Diana had already shifted her focus away from her ruined ex-husband. She sat in the expansive sunroom of her private residential estate. Her home was a modern architectural masterpiece, hidden behind massive wrought iron gates and surrounded by acres of dense private woodlands. It was a fortress designed to keep the chaotic world entirely at bay. She was sipping a cup of dark roast coffee and reviewing the final liquidation documents when her personal security intercom buzzed sharply. The head of her residential security team spoke through the crisp audio channel. He informed Diana that an older couple was currently standing outside the primary security gates. They were visibly distressed and aggressively demanding to speak with her. The security cameras confirmed their identity. It was Linda and William. They had driven all the way from their sprawling suburban estate to beg for their financial lives. They had spent the entire week watching their Golden Boy's empire disintegrate into absolute nothingness. And now the reality of their own impending homelessness had finally shattered their arrogant delusions. Diana did not panic. She set her coffee mug down on the glass table with a steady hand. She instructed the security team to open the outer gates and escort the couple up the long, winding driveway. She wanted to face them on her own territory. She stepped out of the sunroom and walked through the grand foyer of her home, opening the massive solid oak front doors. She stepped out onto the wide stone portico and waited for her former in-laws to approach. Linda and William stumbled out of the security vehicle. They looked absolutely nothing like the wealthy and confident suburban socialites who had gleefully celebrated their son's divorce just 4 days ago. William looked hollowed out. His posture was slumped and his expensive polo shirt was deeply wrinkled. Linda was a complete disaster. Her perfectly styled hair was a messy, tangled bird nest. Her face was puffy and stained with streaks of dried mascara. She was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching a crumpled tissue in her trembling hands. They walked up the stone steps of the portico, but Diana did not invite them inside. She stood at the top of the stairs looking down at them with an expression of pure and unyielding stone. She held the high ground both literally and metaphorically. "Diana, please!" Linda cried out, falling to her knees on the cold stone. She reached out her hands in a pathetic gesture of absolute desperation. "You have to stop this. You have to tell your lawyers to drop the foreclosure. The bank sent us the official notices this morning. They are going to seize our house. They are going to take the home we have lived in for 30 years. We will have absolutely nothing left. William stood behind his wife, nervously wringing his hands together. Diana, we are begging you for mercy. He said, his voice cracking under the immense weight of his humiliation. We know Connor made a terrible mistake. We know he hurt you deeply, but you cannot punish us for his sins. We treated you like our own daughter for years. For the sake of our family history, you have to release the lien on the estate. You are a wealthy woman. You do not need our house. Please show us some grace. Diana looked at the weeping couple kneeling on her porch. She did not feel a single ounce of pity. She felt a profound and deeply satisfying sense of justice. She crossed her arms over her chest and stared down at the people who had treated her like an insignificant servant for her entire marriage. Do not ever use the word family with me again. Diana stated, her voice ringing out like a sharp bell in the cool afternoon air. You never treated me like a daughter, William. You treated me like an appliance. You treated me like a convenience that existed solely to manage your son's laundry and stroke his fragile ego. You spent years talking down to me. You mocked my career because you thought I was just a boring consultant. You genuinely believed I was holding your brilliant son back from his true potential. Diana took a step closer to the edge of the stairs. Her eyes locked onto Linda, who was sobbing loudly into her hands. And you, Linda. Diana continued, her tone turning even colder. You hosted a lavish dinner party on Monday night to celebrate the fact that your son divorced me. You welcomed my pregnant best friend into your dining room with open arms. You clinked your crystal champagne glasses together and laughed at my expense. You were absolutely thrilled that he cut the dead weight. You thought you had secured a wealthy and glamorous future. Your definition of family loyalty only extends to whoever you think can elevate your social status. We were wrong, Linda wailed desperately, grabbing the hem of Diana's coat. We were so incredibly wrong, Diana. We did not know he was lying to us. We did not know he was bankrupt. We did not know you were the one funding his entire life. If we had known the truth, we would never have supported Vanessa. We would have forced him to stay with you. We would have made him apologize. Diana snatched her coat away from Linda's grasping fingers. She looked at her former mother-in-law with absolute and unfiltered disgust. That is exactly why you are in this position, Diana said sharply. You would have forced him to stay with me only because you realized I had the money. Your morality is entirely transactional. You do not care that he committed adultery. You do not care that he betrayed his vows. You only care that the bank accounts are frozen. William took a step forward, his face red with a mixture of shame and anger. But we did not forge those loan documents, Diana. William argued, his voice rising defensively. Connor forged our signatures. He committed the fraud. He committed the crime. Why are you destroying our lives when your fight is with him? It is not fair to take our home because of his felony. Diana let out a short and humorless laugh. It is entirely fair, William. It is the definition of fair. Because you created him. You built the exact monster that is currently tearing your life to pieces. She pointed a rigid finger at William's chest. For 35 years, you shielded that boy from every single consequence he ever faced. You bailed him out of debt. You paid off his mistakes. You told him he was a golden child who could do no wrong. You fed his endless narcissism and taught him that the rules did not apply to him. You raised a man who felt so entirely entitled to wealth that he believed forging federal documents was perfectly acceptable. You enabled his arrogance every single day of his life. Diana turned her fierce gaze back down to Linda, who was shivering on the stone porch. When I discovered his felony forgery 3 years ago, I could have sent him straight to federal prison. Diana explained, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. But I bought his debt to protect you. I spent millions of dollars to keep a roof over your heads because I foolishly believed you were decent people. I gave you 3 years of absolute peace and security. And how did you repay my protection? You cheered when he threw me away for a younger woman. You celebrated my pain. Your son committed the felony, but your boundless entitlement is the reason he felt comfortable doing it. We are so sorry. Linda wept, rocking back and forth on the hard stone. Please, Diana. We have nowhere else to go. We are too old to start over. We will do anything you want. We will disown Connor. We will never speak to Vanessa again. Just please let us keep the house. We are begging you on our hands and knees." Diana watched them beg. She watched the wealthy suburbanites who had looked down on her for years completely humiliate themselves on her front porch. It was the exact ending they deserved. They had worshipped a false idol, and now the temple was crashing down on their heads. "I am not a charity," Diana stated with finality. "And I am not running a halfway house for the parents of fraudulent criminals. Your son signed a commercial loan agreement pledging your estate as collateral. He defaulted on that loan by triggering the morality clause in the contract. As the primary creditor holding that defaulted loan, I have fully executed the lien on the property." Diana reached into the deep pocket of her coat. She pulled out a heavy legal envelope and tossed it down onto the stone steps right in front of William's expensive leather shoes. "The foreclosure is proceeding immediately," Diana announced, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "I am not releasing the lien. I own your estate now. The bank has officially transferred the deed to my parent company. You do not have a home anymore." William stared at the heavy legal envelope on the ground. His entire body started to shake violently as the absolute reality of his situation destroyed his final shred of hope. He realized there was no negotiation, there was no mercy, there was only the cold and calculated execution of a financial contract. "That envelope contains your formal eviction notice," Diana concluded, crossing her arms and looking down at them like a judge delivering a final sentence. "You have exactly 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate the premises entirely. If you are not completely off my property by the end of the month, I will send the county sheriff to forcefully remove you and your possessions will be placed on the street." Linda let out a loud and piercing scream of pure anguish. She buried her face against the cold stone of the portico, sobbing hysterically as her wealthy suburban life vanished into thin air. William dropped to his knees beside his wife, placing a shaking hand on her back. He looked up at Diana, his eyes wide with a combination of terror and absolute defeat. He finally saw the ruthless and brilliant venture capitalist his son had foolishly tried to manipulate. "You have 30 days," Diana repeated, turning her back on the weeping couple. "I suggest you stop wasting time crying on my porch and start packing your boxes." Diana walked back into the grand foyer of her secure fortress. She pushed the massive solid oak doors closed, sealing the chaotic mess of her former in-laws firmly outside. The heavy lock clicked securely into place, echoing loudly in the quiet house. She walked back into the bright sunroom, picked up her dark roast coffee, and calmly went back to reviewing her corporate acquisition files. She had permanently severed the very last string of their toxic dynamic. The cleanup was completely finished. 6 months passed with the brutal and unforgiving efficiency of a ticking clock. The autumn leaves gave way to a bitter winter and then softened into a bright spring. For Connor, the changing of the seasons brought absolutely no relief. He woke up on a Tuesday morning to the harsh and grating sound of his cell phone alarm. He did not wake up in a luxury high-rise overlooking the financial district. He woke up on a thin and lumpy mattress in a cramped one-bedroom apartment situated right next to a noisy, elevated train line. The walls were paper-thin. The air smelled faintly of stale grease from the fast food restaurant located directly downstairs. He sat up and rubbed his bloodshot eyes. He looked around the dismal room. There were no imported Italian leather chairs. There were no sweeping views of the city skyline. There was only a stack of unpaid utility bills resting on a cheap plastic folding table. He dragged himself out of bed and walked into the tiny bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection in the stained mirror. He looked 10 years older. The arrogance that had once defined his entire personality had been completely hollowed out. He put on a stiff polyester polo shirt that bore the bright red logo of a big-box electronics retailer. He was no longer a chief executive officer. He was an assistant floor manager in the television and audio department. He spent his days arranging inventory on metal shelves and explaining extended warranty policies to angry customers. It was a minimum wage existence. He took the job because he had absolutely no other choice. When Diana gave him the ultimate ultimatum 6 months ago, he had folded immediately. He knew she held all the cards. He signed the liquidation documents the very next day, handing over every single patent, every trademark, and every asset belonging to Apex Innovations to Vanguard Capital Partners. He did it to avoid spending 20 years in a federal penitentiary for forgery and wire fraud. He traded his fraudulent empire for his physical freedom. But freedom felt exactly like a different kind of prison. He was drowning in massive personal debt. The legal fees from his desperate scramble to avoid jail had completely bankrupted him. Connor grabbed his keys and locked the flimsy door of his apartment. As he walked down the dimly lit hallway, his phone vibrated sharply in his pocket. He did not need to look at the screen to know who was calling. It was Vanessa. She called him every single morning without fail. She did not call to check on his well-being or ask how his retail shift was going. She called to demand money that he simply did not possess. Vanessa had given birth to the twins 4 months ago. The lavish and luxurious lifestyle she had plotted and schemed to secure had completely evaporated. She was currently living in a cramped rental unit on the outskirts of the city. She spent her days furiously navigating the family court system trying to squeeze blood from a stone. She dragged Connor before a judge every chance she got, waiving child support orders and demanding immediate payment. But the family court judges looked at Connor's retail pay stubs and simply shook their heads. They garnished a tiny fraction of his minimum wage paycheck, leaving him with barely enough cash to buy groceries. The reality of her situation infuriated Vanessa to the point of absolute madness. She had betrayed her loyal best friend to steal a multi-million-dollar tech founder. Now she was strapped with 2 screaming infants and a father who could not even afford to buy premium diapers. Her high society friends had abandoned her the instant her credit cards declined at the baby boutique. She was a total outcast. The wealthy wives she used to gossip with now actively avoided her at the grocery store. She had tried to reach out to Diana one last time, begging for a fraction of a percent of mercy, but her emails bounced back with an automated legal notice. She was permanently blocked and entirely forgotten. Connor silenced his phone and stepped out onto the cold pavement. He knew Vanessa would just leave another screaming voicemail threatening to have him jailed for unpaid support. It was a miserable and inescapable cycle. After finishing a grueling 9-hour shift dealing with rude customers, Connor took the bus to visit his parents. He could not afford a car anymore. He walked 4 blocks from the bus stop to a dull and aging condominium complex. Linda and William had officially vacated their sprawling suburban estate exactly 30 days after Diana dropped the foreclosure notice on their front porch. They had packed their 30 years of memories into cardboard boxes and watched the bank transfer their deed to Vanguard Capital Partners. Connor knocked on the door of Unit B. Linda opened the door. She looked exhausted and incredibly frail. The vibrant and arrogant socialite who used to host lavish dinner parties had completely disappeared. She wore a faded sweater and offered her son a weak and trembling smile. Connor walked into the tiny living room. The space was incredibly cramped. Their large antique furniture did not fit in the small condo, forcing them to sell most of their possessions at a humiliating estate sale. William was sitting in a recliner watching a small television. He barely acknowledged Connor. The shame of their spectacular fall from grace had broken his spirit entirely. They lived on fixed Social Security incomes now. Their prestigious country club memberships had been instantly revoked. Their wealthy friends completely ostracized them. In their elite circles, losing your estate to foreclosure was a fatal social disease. People they had known for decades pretended not to see them at the local pharmacy. The complete destruction of their social status was a daily and agonizing punishment. They sat in their tiny condo surrounded by the consequences of their own actions. They finally realized that their blind enabling had created the exact monster that devoured their entire lives. They had shielded their golden child from every mistake, and in return, he had forged their signatures and rendered them homeless. The silence in the small condo was deafening. There was nothing left to say. Miles away from the noisy train lines and the cramped condominiums, the city skyline glittered brightly against the twilight sky. Diana stood on the expansive open-air balcony of a stunning new commercial property. The building was a towering architectural marvel of glass and steel. Her firm, Vanguard Capital Partners, had just finalized the acquisition of the entire structure that very afternoon. It was the crowning jewel in her rapidly expanding real estate and technology portfolio. She rested her hands on the smooth glass railing and breathed in the crisp and fresh evening air. The city stretched out below her, looking like a vast ocean of glowing lights and endless possibilities. She was wearing a perfectly tailored emerald green suit that radiated power and quiet confidence. Her lead attorney Arthur stepped out onto the balcony, holding two crystal glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to Diana and smiled. He congratulated her on the flawless execution of the acquisition. He told her the board of directors was absolutely thrilled with her quarterly projections. Diana took a sip of the cold water and thanked him. She looked out over the horizon and felt a profound and unwavering sense of absolute peace. There was no anger left in her heart. There was no bitterness. There was no lingering desire for revenge against the people who had tried to break her. Holding on to anger was a terrible return on investment, and Diana was a master of managing her assets. Connor. Vanessa, Linda, and William were completely erased from her reality. They were nothing but a closed file in the archives of her life. She did not waste a single second of her valuable time wondering about their current misery. She had surgically removed the parasites that were draining her energy and bleeding her finances dry. By cutting the dead weight, she had allowed herself to finally soar. She had built a beautiful and impenetrable life completely out of their reach. She was surrounded by loyal colleagues, brilliant partners, and a massive empire that she had constructed with her own two hands. She had protected her wealth, outsmarted her enemies, and secured her independence with absolute precision. The cool wind brushed against her face, lifting her hair slightly. She turned back toward the bright and bustling boardroom where her team was waiting to celebrate their latest victory. She walked through the heavy glass doors, leaving the past firmly outside in the dark. She was entirely whole, entirely successful, and completely free to conquer whatever came next.